Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3401, Huge Snake. After Zen had cleaned his body, he checked his surroundings. Except for the hexagram array in the center, there was nothing else in the room. An idea popped out of his mind. Now that I've returned to normal, what if I walk out of this room? He muttered. Driven by curiosity, he walked towards the door of the room. When he reached the door, however, something strange happened. The moment he stepped out, countless thin black threads suddenly appeared in the passage. The thin black threads formed a net that blocked his path. Don't try to challenge the rules they've set, lest you cause unnecessary trouble, the primeval Lord of Heaven warned. Judging from the number of the hexagram arrays the instant civilization had arranged, it wasn't easy to open a room of the hexagram array. Anyone who broke into the area outside the room by force would bring great pressure to the eternal scroll painting. No one knew what would happen after that. Just as Zen was about to exert even more strength, he retreated when he heard the primeval Lord of Heaven's words. After he stepped into the hexagram array, he turned into a picture again. Egan and Kirk had been watching outside for a long time. When they saw Zen exit the room, both of them immediately went to him. Zen, your body is immune to the poison. What a truly great advantage, Egan said with admiration. Members of various other shore races in the Grand Plain stage had different body shapes, but only a few of them were truly unafraid of the poison. Moreover, the venom of the poisonous leech was quite special, and even the few creatures with the poison-resistant physique found it hard to resist the poisonous leech's attack. Aside from the poisonous leeches, are there any other creatures on this path? Zen asked. At that moment, Egan became cautious. It was easy to pass through this path before. In the past, everything went smoothly as long as one went through the corridor with poisonous leeches, but now, it's hard to say in this special period, he said. When the eternal scroll painting opened this time, there was something wrong on the first and second pages. Thus, how could the remaining path be so easy to pass? The three of them advanced into the depths of the no-break maze once again. Then, several more forks appeared in front of them. Since Kirk was familiar with the forks, he chose the direction without hesitation. Some beasts in the scroll painting came from both of their sides along the way. The beasts weren't that strong, but before Zen could attack them, both Kirk and Egan already killed them. However, they did encounter one tricky thing. It was a spider the same size as Zen, and there was a hexagram array not far away from the spider. This time, Egan entered the hexagram array and returned to his normal form. Then, he asked Kirk to provoke the spider and lure it into the room with the hexagram array. The moment the spider entered the room, Egan's forehead suddenly released a ray of light. Outside the room, Zen saw a ray of black light flash above Egan's head. He didn't know what kind of powerful theurgy the black light was. In just a second, the light sliced the spider in half. When Zen first saw Egan in stage 13 of the other shore, the stage suppressed the latter's true power. Therefore, he didn't think that Egan was strong. Now that Egan had returned to the Grand Plain stage, he was indeed extraordinarily powerful. After all, he was the best warrior among the young generations of the Three Eyes race. His strength was only second to those of the Eternal Realm masters of his race. Once they had dealt with the spider, the three of them set off again. There were no longer any forks on the path. The other paths in the no-break maze began to converge, and they saw members from the other races of the other shore on their way. Although the Three Eyes race was neutral in the Grand Plain stage, they had a good relationship with the other races of the other shore. Egan was young, but he seemed to get along well with the others in stage 32 of the other shore. Thus, he took the initiative to communicate with the other shore creatures and roughly understood the situation. The other paths had also changed, but the overall change wasn't that big. Only a few members of the other shore races encountered great danger, but most of them passed safely. At that rate, it wouldn't be long before they passed through the maze and went to the third page. Thoughts about the high possibility of becoming Eternal Realm Masters filled the other shore creatures' minds, which boosted their morale and increased their speed. The end of the no-break maze is right in front of us. It's also the most dangerous area, said Egan. The entire no-break maze looked like a huge spindle. There was only one entrance and one exit, so all the other shore creatures would eventually gather together. No matter which path they chose in the maze, there was no easy way to pass through it, and the end of the maze was the most difficult and dangerous of them all. Just as Egan, Zen, and the others arrived at the end of the maze, 3 other shore creatures stood in front of them. The one on the left was none other than Walden of the Violet Cloud race. "Why don't you move along?" Egan asked. Walden observed Zen, Egan and Kirk for a while, especially since Zen looked very much like a member of the Three Eyes race. At that point, only through the lack of an eye on Zen's forehead, one could tell him from the other two. When Walden realized that Zen had also passed smoothly, he looked slightly disappointed. The human brat made it through the maze alive. Then, he said, the end of the no-break maze is right in front of us. It used to be very dangerous. I wonder what kind of powerful creature is there this time, but we won't dare to go there. Will you try? Egan blinked his eyes and took a step back, while Zen stood still as if he hadn't heard what Walden said. It would be fine if Walden didn't say anything, but now his words made Zen and the others more vigilant. 5 other shore creatures explored the maze together with Walden. The 6 of them cooperated well with each other, so they were the first to arrive at the end of the maze. Based on the principle of teamwork, they planned to go directly out of the no-break maze and enter the 3rd page. As soon as they rushed forward, however, a large black creature appeared. It turned out to be a big black snake, and its enormous body occupied almost the maze's whole passageway. Walden and 2 of his companions reacted very quickly. The moment they saw the big black snake come out from one side, they used almost all of their strength to retreat to the passageway. However, the 3 other shore creatures that were in front weren't so lucky. They didn't even have time to call for help before the black snake swallowed them. The big black snake was so strong that resistance was futile. That was why Walden and his group waited in their spot. When he saw Zen and the others arrive, he suddenly had a wishful thought. He hoped that Zen would risk his life to deal with the huge snake. He didn't expect that Zen would turn a deaf ear to his words. Not long after, more and more other shore creatures came out from the different paths in the no-break maze and gathered in the same area. "Why don't you all move forward? I'm afraid the beast guarding the exit of the no-break maze is not easy to deal with this time." Of course, the other shore creatures had different personalities. Some of them were quite patient and chose to plan before they took action, while others were very irritable and rash. When no one wanted to go forward, a tall and burly member of the Earth Tremor race squeezed out of the crowd and stood in front of everyone. "It's not a good idea for you to only wait here. Let me step forward and have a look," he announced. He quickly stepped forward after he spoke. As soon as he walked away, a large black shadow emerged from the other side of the passageway. It opened its big, black, bloody mouth and closed it right after. At the same time, the member of the Earth Tremor race disappeared from everyone's sight. Chapter 3402, Another Snake. The passageway erupted into an uproar after the warrior of the Earth Tremor race was swallowed by the black snake. The other shore creatures at the front even began backpedaling non-stop. "It's the evil Orochi. Could it really be? I know this time has not been ordinary, but why did an evil Orochi have to appear?" They all fell deep into despair when they saw the black snake known as the evil Orochi. Many other shore creatures had been studying the no-break maze and the eternal scroll painting diligently for many chaotic eras. Most were very clear on what beasts would appear in which part of the maze, the beasts, strength and how to deal with them. It was well established that the road chosen by the Three Eyes race was abundant in poisonous leeches and the path the Violet Cloud race often took possessed a large number of devil shadow butterflies. There were usually powerful beasts guarding the end of the maze. They were few in number, but they were seriously powerful. Among them was the beast known as Worm Taper. It had appeared on the first page before but often appeared at the end of the maze. Although worm tapers were powerful and their movements were erratic, there was usually only one of them guarding the end of the maze, so it likely would not cause any devastation like that on the first page. There were also other beasts of different shapes and sizes that had appeared at the end of the maze. All were extremely powerful but had their weaknesses. For instance, Worm Taper, due to its shape, couldn't enter the room with a hexagram array. The attack of another venomous beast was terrifying but it moved slowly. In addition to these common beasts, there were also some rare ones such as the Wall Ghost and Earth Monkey. If they came across these, all that could be done was pray for luck. The Wall Ghost and Earth Monkey were still not the most powerful beasts around though. Undoubtedly, the most powerful and the rarest, was this giant serpent before them, Evil Orochi. In recorded years, it had only appeared 5 times. And when it did appear, none of the creatures had reached the eternal realm. When it appeared the first time, the other shore creatures that had entered the eternal scroll painting did not know of its strength. As a result, almost all of them were killed. Things ended much better on its second appearance. Those who had entered knew they stood no chance against it and simply surrendered and were eventually kicked out of the eternal scroll painting. From then on things continued in this way. If warriors were unlucky enough to meet the serpent, they chose to give up, which could at least allow them to escape with their lives. This was why when the other shore creatures saw the evil Orochi this time, they all heaved heavily. They stood no chance and would have to give up. It seems you are quite unlucky. You've encountered this beast on your first entry into the eternal scroll painting, Egan said with a bitter smile. The image of this giant snake flashing by replayed in Zen's mind. He frowned and asked, "Is it really as powerful as you say?" "Yes," replied Egan firmly. "Not a single soul had managed to survive it. We can't go forward. We'll just wait till the next time the eternal scroll painting opens," said Kirk standing beside him. They weren't the only ones feeling this way, the other creatures were resigned to surrender as well. They had time to wait for their next opportunity. After all, they had been faced with the evil Orochi, and there was no shame in leaving empty-handed. But Zen would not back down so easily. Egan had said this giant snake was invincible, but he still asked the primeval Lord of Heaven for advice before he made any kind of move. Its first appearance that the boy from the Three Eyes race mentioned occurred in the 83rd Chaos, the 5th chaotic era after our human race entered the Grand Plane stage, explained the primeval Lord of Heaven. 9 of the human race entered the eternal scroll painting and none returned. If I had entered with them, I fear I would not have come back either. Back then, the human race's power in the Grand Plane stage was not small, and there were certainly a large number of human warriors strong enough to enter the eternal scroll painting every time. And yet even the primeval Lord of Heaven would have had no chance of coming out victoriously against the evil Orochi. Zen made his mind up fast and decided to give up on entering the third page and would instead wait for the end of the eternal scroll painting. Just then, as many other shore creatures accepted their choice to give up, a black light flashed from below their gaze. This left everyone stunned. Is this another gigantic snake? They wondered. Once they had transformed into pictures, they couldn't look in all directions. From their vantage point, the end and exit of the maze were above the other parts. But the flash had come from below. Is that another huge snake? 2 snakes. Will it come in? Some trembling voices spoke their fears. Encountering an evil Orochi was already incredibly unlucky. The eternal scroll painting had opened and closed countless times and the evil Orochi only appeared 5 times. But there were no records in history of 2 appearing at once. Everyone discussed in shaky voices, and then the evil Orochi swept past them from below once more while another passed overhead. These 2 snakes now blocked off everyone in the passageway. Fortunately, they just passed by and disappeared in seconds. But even their shadows flashing past in the blink of an eye was terrifying for all the other shore creatures. "Do you think they can enter this passageway?" asked one of the creatures. With this question hanging out there, everyone's nerves rattled much more. They had not been told of any safe areas in the no-break maze, but those who had been unwilling to rush forward would wait in this passageway, hoping it was safe enough. But was it really safe? It should be safe here, another creature replied, quivering in fear. "Well, generally, other shore creatures at the end of the maze won't come in," said Kirk confidently. "But that evil Orochi doesn't come from the end," said Egan, frowning. Several abnormalities had occurred in the eternal scroll painting this time, and now the impossible seemed to be unfolding before them. Who was to say whether this passageway was safe or not? Egan's words shrouded everyone's hearts in an ominous dark cloud. "Shut up," screamed Walden. Egan had long been displeased with the violet cloud race and replied coldly, "I was talking to my friends." "You." Just as Walden was about to retort, the evil Orochi swept across again from below. This time, halfway through, it suddenly drilled into the passageway. Their greatest fear was being realized. They had remained vigilant in the passageway, still incautious. So the moment they saw the evil Orochi rush into the passageway, they all rushed upwards. If they stayed there, they would surely die. Rushing to the exit of the maze at least gave them a chance at survival, even if only a small one. Chapter 3403, Keep Making Turns. The first to rush upwards were the 3 other shore creatures of the Wind Wave race. The Wind Wave race was one of the ancient races on the other shore. Although they had also submitted to the Element Spirit civilization, their status was much higher than that of the Violet Cloud race. The Eternal Realm Masters of the Wind Wave race even had a certain influence within the Element Spirit civilization. This time, the wind wave race was quite lucky. Among the 4 members they sent into the eternal scroll painting, only one died on the first page. The moment the second evil Orochi appeared, the 3 members of the wind wave race guessed that it would likely rush up along the passage, so they quietly crept upward ahead of everyone. They were already in the lead, and when the evil Orochi below really did rush up, they immediately took to their heels. Rush out as fast as we can. We'll be safe as long as we can come out of the maze. Quote, quote. The 3 members of the wind wave race also had a strong desire to survive. They didn't know whether or not they could successfully break out of the maze. However, they knew that if they continued to stay where they were, they would definitely die. Although the chance of making it out alive was slim to none, they could only continue to fight for their survival. Nevertheless, what happened next just completely extinguished their hope. The huge black snake hiding at the end of the passage suddenly came out of its hiding spot and slithered towards them at a lightning speed. Its jaws were wide open. The last thing the 3 of them saw before they were swallowed was an endless, slimy, black hole inside the snake's fanged mouth. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. The 3 disappeared without even leaving a tiny bit of scream, much less traces of blood on the scene. But it was actually such a quietly creeping death that planted an indescribable fear in the hearts of the others. Lives had disappeared before they even knew what was happening. Almost right after those 3 other shore creatures were swallowed, 3 streaks of bloody light fell on 3 of the 3 purities stones in the Grand Plain stage. The area where they fell was precisely the territory of the wind wave race. Upon seeing the bloody lights, the members of the wind wave race waiting outside immediately roared in anger. Each race had suffered heavy losses this time, except for the wind wave race, which only had 1 member dead. The wind wave race had been secretly rejoicing in their hearts because of this. How could they possibly think that they would lose the remaining 3 people at the same time? The surviving other shore creatures in the passage were practically beside themselves with dread. The path ahead was blocked, and the pursuer behind was hot on their trail. They really had their back against the wall now. But in this situation, they had no time to ponder about other ways to go out. The passage wasn't long, and the evil Orochi below would soon come up. Even though the 3 members of the wind wave race were swallowed by the other evil Orochi, they still had to continue to rush up. The next 4 other shore creatures that rushed up were quite lucky. Maybe because it had just swallowed 3 people, the evil Orochi couldn't change its direction fast enough to bite those 4. Seeing the success of the 4 creatures, Zen and the others immediately followed their lead and rushed up as fast as they could. Thus, the usually tranquil world inside the scroll painting was now full of hustle and bustle as creatures that had transformed into paintings were all running for their lives. At the end of the maze, there were many crisscrossing passages, dividing the area into many smaller squares. Upon arriving at the intersection, Zen and the other shore creatures immediately changed their direction and went into the passage parallel to the one they came from. Just right after they stepped into the passage, the evil Orochi from below caught up with them. 2 other shore creatures didn't dodge fast enough and ended up in its belly. How miserable! Kirk's face paled in fear upon personally witnessing the 2 creatures being swallowed alive. As he was a picture now, he could also see his paper-white face. In comparison, Zen and Egan looked much calmer. Zen, needless to say, had experienced life and death crises none of these creatures had experienced before or would experience in the future. Almost nothing could shock him now. Besides, he had long learned that neither panic nor fear would be of much help in the face of mortal dangers. As for Egan, he had been relying on his own ability to venture in stage 13 for a long time. The crises he went through in his journey had honed both his abilities and guts. The way the evil Orochi moves is very strange, whispered Zen, who had pasted himself to the wall in the passage. Yes, its speed seems to be fast only when it moves in a straight line, another shore creature replied. This creature also had herself pasted to the wall. She was small and had a pair of pointed ears on top of her head. Her body was half human, half fox. Because she was in the form of a painting now, her detailed features were almost inconspicuous. What this, fox, said made Zen subconsciously take a few more glances at her. Most other shore creatures in their group were already in panic by now. They only thought about how terrifying the evil Orochis were and how to escape. This fox, however, remained calm and assessed the opponent. She also seemed to have come to the same conclusion as him. It should be so. Zen nodded at her. Just now, when the evil Orochi made a turn and entered the passage where they took shelter, the speed at which it changed its direction was extremely slow. Had it been able to change direction quickly at that time, all of them would have been killed, including Zen. If the evil Orochis can't change their direction quickly, doesn't it mean they are quite easy to deal with? The gears in Egan's mind turned at a lightning speed. A glimmer of hope for survival had completely rejuvenated him. There were many huge square areas at the end of the no-break maze, and each of those areas had countless rooms with hexagram arrays inside. In such a layout, there would be many corners at which they could turn no matter where they went. The speed of the evil Orochis was unbelievably fast. Even the Violet Cloud race, which was well known for their quick speed, couldn't outrun or dodge them. But if they could only change their direction slowly, the threat they posed on the remaining other shore creatures would be greatly reduced. At this moment, the evil Orochi that rushed past them had turned around and was now rushing back to the intersection. Its speed was still incredibly fast. But when it rushed to Zen's side, its speed suddenly became extremely slow. It slowly turned its head and entered the horizontal passage where Zen and the others were. It's turning around, another shore creature exclaimed with a trembling voice. While the evil Orochi slowly turned its body, its head was already a few feet away from where they were hiding. Let's make a turn and move to another passage, Zen said calmly. As the passage where they were now was a horizontal one, he, Egan, and the others turned at one of the corners and entered a vertical one. As soon as the evil Orochi entered the horizontal passage, it found that its prey had all fled to the vertical one. After a moment of surprise, it slowly turned its head and followed after them. However, a slow evil Orochi wasn't a threat to them. They continued to move back and forth between the horizontal and the vertical passages. Slowly but surely, they crept upward bit by bit. Their speed wasn't fast either, but by moving this way, they were moving closer and closer towards the exit of the maze. As they continued to slowly make their way towards the exit, the rekindled hope in their hearts continued to grow brighter. It seems the evil Orochis aren't as powerful as people said, another shore creature said with a trace of disdain. What's so terrifying about animals that can't even turn at a corner? Another other shore creature replied with a laugh. Nevertheless, if it was so easy to deal with those snakes, how could so many other shore creatures become their victims before? Zen didn't say anything. He always felt that something was wrong with this whole thing. If the evil Orochis were really that easy to deal with, people wouldn't have put the word, evil, in its name. After all, those who could enter the eternal scroll painting were all supposed to reach the eternal realm. They were all smart and would never do something without a good cause. Just as they moved to another horizontal passage from a vertical one, a black shadow suddenly flew towards them from a distance at a high speed. It was the other evil Orochi. Chapter 3404, A Dead End. When the other shore creatures went through the horizontal and vertical passageways, they were so focused on the first evil Orochi that they completely ignored the second one. Forgotten by them, the second evil Orochi changed its direction in a farther distance. Just as the other shore creatures turned around the corner of the passageway, they happened to come face to face with the evil Orochi. This sudden meeting stunned some of the creatures. Charge! Zen roared with a raised fist. He arched his back and used almost all of his strength to charge to the side. There was no going back now. The only choice they had was to dash forward. It wasn't just Zen who did that. All the other shore creatures were also adamant in fighting their way forward. In the face of death, desperation often gave way to explosive power. As soon as they rushed forward, this evil Orochi dashed towards them. It was a silent death attack from the black snake shadow. As the two parties were about to collide, the other shore creatures couldn't help but look daggers at the evil Orochi with the hopes that it would at least slow down. Egan and Kirk were in the middle of the oncoming group with Zen following closely after the latter. The next moment, Zen felt a terrifying force hit his body. He was not swallowed up by the evil Orochi, but he was hit by it. The powerful wave of energy made him spin quickly like a spinning top. It took a long while for him to stop. When he stopped, Zen looked down at his body and was extremely shocked by what he saw. The surface of his own painting was covered with cracks, and pain emanated from every single part of his body. There was no denying just how extremely serious his injuries were. Because of the wounds he sustained, the chaotic source spirits naturally fell into fatigue. The force of the impact actually exceeded 100,000 divine megatons. However, Zen was still lucky. The same could not be said for the other shore creatures behind him. Two other shore creatures had also been hit. These two also cultivated the myriad tribulations body, but they couldn't withstand the terrifying impact and their bodies shattered immediately. All that was left of them were broken limbs strewn all over the ground. As paintings in the scroll painting, however, they were not that bloody. Those who were even more unfortunate got swallowed up by the evil Orochi and did not even have time to scream. Egan, who stood not that far away from Zen, quickly checked on him. "Zen, are you okay?" he asked. Zen felt the atmosphere grow a bit strange and stifling as everyone's gaze focused on him. I'm slightly injured but I'm fine, he assured Egan. Slightly injured? He was slightly injured. The other shore creatures couldn't help but scoff in disbelief. The other shore creatures that were able to enter the eternal scroll painting must have cultivated the myriad tribulations body. Due to this fact, everyone shared the same threshold in terms of enduring a strike. Even though Zen had obtained a few more bone tribulation imprints than them, and they could only bear 80,000 divine megatons of power while he could bear 100,000 divine megatons of power, the gap between them could not possibly be so big. The two unfortunate other shore creatures behind Zen earlier were respectively from the reverse training race and the iron lineage race. These two races were famous for their strong bodies. After they obtained the myriad tribulations bodies, their bodies were expected to be much stronger than ordinary myriad tribulations bodies. However, they shattered just like that while Zen remained standing. A few cracks littered his body but other than that, he was fine. Egan couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. That's good then, let's continue to move upwards. The extent of Zen's strength was a mystery to them and it was Zen's secret, so Egan naturally did not ask. How his physical body remained intact despite that wave of overwhelming force would remain a secret and the other shore creatures knew that there was no way Zen would answer if they asked. Still, that did not mean that it wouldn't be a hot topic amongst them. I heard that absorbing chaotic source spirits is a unique method to strengthen one's physical body in the chaos. I've heard about that too, a long time ago, but it's not really worth mentioning. Those are just creatures from the chaotic source sea in stage 22 of the other shore. Even if they use those creatures to the extreme, they would only be able to withstand 10 to 20,000 divine megatons of power. Then how was he able to block the evil Orochi's attack? I don't know. If you want, then why not ask him? Everyone constantly moved and shifted between the horizontal and vertical passageways, slowly moving towards the no-break maze's exit. The space at the exit wasn't very large and everyone grew even more excited as they got closer. Nobody had ever passed through the area guarded by the evil Orochi, so they felt a sense of pride for having accomplished such a feat. However, Zen and several other shore creatures remained cautious. There was no way it was going to be so easy, right? Everyone moved to the left. The second evil Orochi is on the other side. The shout came from the other shore creature who was half human and half fox, guiding everyone towards the next passageway. They hadn't noticed the second evil Orochi earlier and suffered a great loss. Since the fox led the way, they naturally followed. Move to the upper right. Upper left. Upper right. With the fox's continuous command, everyone quickly traversed the squares as the two evil Orochis could only slowly twist their heads, unable to speed up. Upper right, upper right, upper right again. As they listened to the fox's instructions, nobody noticed the corners of her mouth rise and reveal a mocking smile. Someone remarked when noticing something was wrong. If we keep moving to the upper right, won't we be led farther and farther away from the exit? The exit was located in the middle of the no-break maze's end. If they kept heading towards the upper right, they would get farther and farther away. How did you lead the way? Should we change directions? We should, right? Just as everyone was blaming her, the fox stopped and laughed. You only noticed now. You're all truly too dull. Her words made Zen and the others frown. At that moment, the two evil Orochis suddenly appeared and blocked their path from both sides. Having bypassed several crisscrossed roads, these two were able to trap the warriors. This fox deliberately led them to a dead end. Everyone's eyes were heavy with anger as they stared at the fox. Why did you do that? Why do you want to harm us? If you lead us to a dead end, you'll die too. Everyone's faces paled as they stared at the two evil Orochis that surrounded them. Their fear was also coupled with great puzzlement. Why did the fox bring everyone here when she was also another shore creature? In the Grand Plain stage, is there another shore race whose members are half human and half fox? Zen asked out of the blue. Silence was the only reply he received. Though there were all sorts of other shore races in the Grand Plain stage, there wasn't really any sort of half-human and half-fox race. Could it be that this creature was not another shore creature? Chapter 3405, Food. The forms of the other shore creatures who entered the Eternal Scroll painting had undergone a great change. Thus, as the fox traveled through the maze looking very similar to the others, they had taken her without doubt as one of their own. However, Zen's words raised everyone's suspicions. Are you a beast of the scroll painting? Zen asked. The fox stood nearby, and spoke in a disdainful tone. That's the name given by you stupid creatures. As an intelligent being, she was very dissatisfied about being named a beast. Anyway, it doesn't matter, said the fox, giving a short laugh. You are no different from the thousands of idiots who came before you. Like them, you will surely die. As she spoke, she beckoned with her hand. The two evil Orochis, which had been blocking the way out, slowly crawled in the passageway. Obviously, they were under her control. Thousands. You've killed thousands of creatures? Egan asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. The fox smiled faintly. Probably more, but I've forgotten the exact number. Did you kill them with the help of the evil Orochis? That's impossible. The evil Orochi had only appeared a few times, said Kirk. According to the records of the Grand Plain stage, the evil Orochi had only appeared 5 times in known history. At the first time, it had killed all the creatures. On the other 4 occasions, some other shore creatures had survived by directly choosing to quit. The fox snorted. You think I really need the evil Orochi to kill you idiots? She said sarcastically. Use your head and search your memories. You must remember that your people had been all killed several times in the Eternal Scroll painting. The test in the Eternal Scroll painting was notoriously difficult. Many people gave up when they realized they could not survive, but many others chose to keep going and attempt to pass the test. When the Eternal Scroll painting opened, it was not unusual for around 30 to 50% of those who entered to perish in the test. There were also rare occasions when not a single creature survived, all were killed for some unknown reason. The other shore creatures in the Grand Plain stage were all afraid of the evil Orochi and several other powerful beasts in the painting. But at least these beasts were known, because those who survived their encounters with them recorded their appearance and nature once they had left the Eternal Scroll painting alive. However, there seemed to be one beast of the Eternal Scroll painting who was absent from the records, because all who saw her were killed. Many of the other shore creatures were beginning to realize their peril. What should we do now? They asked, their voices trembling. There is nothing you can do but await your death, said the fox calmly. We'll kill you first, someone shouted. One of the creatures leapt out and rushed towards the fox. At the same instant that the creature approached, the fox's body dwindled then diminished altogether. Like a projection, she vanished then reappeared on top of her attacker. Before the creature knew what had happened, he was covered by the fox, who instantly slashed him into 2. If Zen could observe this scene from a more advanced perspective, he would see that this fox had instantly jumped out of the second page of the Eternal Scroll painting. The fox flipped her hands in the air and crossed them on the second page, tearing that creature's painting apart. The painting of the creature ripped into 2 pieces instantly. It's the ability of the worm taper, Zen murmured, frowning. Others, including Egan and Kirk, had noticed the same thing. They had planned to rush forward to subdue the fox, but her strength and mode of attack were terrifying. Even if they all united and tried to attack a worm taper at the same time, they would find it difficult, if not impossible, to win against it. Who else is ready to die here? The fox asked. Her figure was quickly returning to normal, until it was completely restored on the Eternal Scroll painting. You are very powerful, and you can control the evil Orochis. Why don't you just kill us directly? Zen asked in a low voice. The 2 evil Orochis had already had them cornered, under her control. If she had simply wanted to kill all of them, it would have been unnecessary for her to lead them all the way to the upper right corner of the maze. Those who heard Zen's question pricked up their ears, listening anxiously. Judging from how harshly the fox had spoken to them so far, they wondered what answer she would give, and knew it would be unpleasant. It's too wasteful to let the evil Orochis swallow you, the fox said casually. There are still many beasts of scroll painting. You mentioned waiting for food. With that, the fox turned and walked up the right corner of the passageway. 2 evil Orochis appeared from both sides, approaching the group of other shore creatures, whose skin tingled with dread. None wanted to follow the lead of the fox. However, the evil Orochis limited their options. Maybe the fox would harm them, but the evil Orochis would definitely kill them right now if they tried to retreat. Escorted by the watchful eyes of the evil Orochis, everyone slowly followed the fox. They came to a stop when they saw that there were indeed some small beasts waiting at the end of the upper right corner. They looked like dogs. Some of the other shore creatures immediately recognized them. Are those the iron dogs? They are. Are you going to feed us to them? The iron dog was very common in the first page. Many of other shore creatures in the group had seen and killed these beasts, so they naturally recognized them at a glance. The fox said distractedly. She glanced back at them. You're right, they're iron dogs. Very clever of you to recognize them so quickly. They didn't feel any pleasure at her praise. All the other shore creatures had fallen silent. They had always been the great talents in the Grand Plain stage, and even on the other shore. Now, for the first time, they were the prey, they were the ones facing defeat at the hands of a stronger opponent. They were entirely at the mercy of the fox. Black despair began filling their thoughts, and their hearts felt heavy with dread. Zen kept moving forward very slowly, quietly observing everything around him. The end of the maze was comprised of squares, and many paths crisscrossed each other. At this point, however, every channel was blocked by the evil orochis, which prevented them from finding a way out. As they crossed another horizontal passageway, following the fox, Zen suddenly paused briefly, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. 2 hexagram arrays were placed symmetrically on the right corner. Egan, Zen whispered. Egan immediately followed Zen's gaze. Kirk and some other creatures also caught sight of the 2 arrays. In fact, there were a lot of hexagram arrays at the end of the maze. 2 such arrays would appear after they passed through every 3 passages. Zen was thinking hard. The problem was that even if they managed to reach the arrays and regained their original forms, they still wouldn't be a match for the evil orochis who guarded them. No one had bothered to use that strategy against the evil orochis because it was no different from courting death. But the situation was getting desperate. No one was willing to be torn apart by the dogs and eaten as food. If the result was death either way, then it was better to die fighting than to wait passively to be killed. Many of the other shore creatures had reached the same conclusion. When they moved past the next passageway, 2 groups of creatures rushed out on both sides. In the blink of an eye, several other shore creatures had stepped into the hexagram arrays. They finally returned to their original forms. Yet they wore grim expressions, for they knew that they were still outmatched by the formidable opponent. Still, they were also determined to put up a good fight. Regardless of the outcome, as long as they were in the arrays, they could at least fight with their real strength. Chapter 3406, The Fox Girl. The Fox Girl stood at the upper right corner of the no-break maze, sneering at the scramble taking place below. There were many rooms of hexagram arrays at the end of the maze. Those unwilling to surrender would most likely attempt to escape into these rooms. She had expected them to follow this course of action. Do you seriously think resuming your original form will help you fight me? Unfortunately, none who came before you got away from me. Do you think you'll manage it? Ha ha ha. Her laughter was as crisp and sweet as wind chimes stirred by a gentle breeze, but it was lined with menace which shook all the other shore creatures to their bones and made them shiver when they heard it. She then slowly turned away from the upper right corner. She's coming down. Does she plan to enter the hexagram arrays? She's not going to let the evil orochis attack instead. She's going to fight on her own. Everyone trembled in fear. They might have returned to their original forms, but they were still not confident they could contend with the evil orochis. If she drove the giant serpents right into the rooms, they'd all be destroyed with ease. Even if they possessed some truly special skills, dealing with the evil orochis would still prove mightily difficult. But it seemed the fox intended to go in alone. She stopped in the center where the passages intersected. Zen, Egan, Kirk and some other shore creatures were in the room of hexagon array on the left, while Walden and another group were in the room on the right. A short while later, she had made her choice and walked towards the room on the right. When the creatures, including Walden, saw her coming, their eyes widened and their hearts began beating vigorously. They had no way to effectively deal with the evil orochis, but they believed they might stand a chance against the fox alone. They had appeared to be stuck in a dead end, but it now seemed a favorable opportunity that they would all seize desperately. Everyone, spread out. She controls the evil orochis, so if we capture her, the snakes will be forced to retreat. Don't hold anything back. Do whatever is necessary using whatever you have. They had all been cowering in the corner of the room, but now, in the face of battle, they summoned all the courage in their hearts and stood in a semicircle surrounding the door. They gathered all the strength they had in their bodies. The fox stepped into the room and onto the hexagram array, revealing her true form. She looked like a little girl of 13 or 14 years old with 2 fluffy ears on her head, her body emitting a faint halo. She was as flawless as white jade, her light purple hair covering most of her baby fat face. This form is truly disgusting, the fox remarked at her own body. As a beast in the scroll painting, she believed her painting form to be at a higher level and that this one contained too many details and was low grade. Let's get her. Walden bellowed his war cry the second she turned into her normal form. He shifted his body slightly and a purple jade token appeared in his hand. Puff! He pinched the token and crushed it to powder. As it shattered, a purple shadow burst forth, releasing a vast aura as it did. The aura was confined to the room and the intense pressure it gave off forced everyone to take a few steps back. Only the fox girl seemed unfazed and stood motionlessly. It's the Blessing Myriad token. It seems to be of a high grade. The Violet Cloud race is so generous that they have allowed this man to take this token. Quote, a flame of hope ignited in the other shore creatures' hearts when they saw the purple shadow. The Blessing Myriad token came from stage 33 of the other shore. There was a mountain known as the Blessing Mountain where there were life forms of pure energy. These life forms were similar to pure energy entities, gentle in nature and numerous in number. Once they perished, they would fuse into a kind of purple jade found in the mountain and stay there. The more lives fused into a piece of jade, the higher grade it would be. Divided according to their colors, there were a total of 6 grades of the Blessing Myriad token. The 6th grade was the highest and was considered a lethal weapon in stage 33 of the other shore. This Blessing Myriad token was a personal token of Walden's grandfather, who had kept it for many years but never used it. His grandfather had given it to him for protection before he entered stage 33. It had never occurred to Walden that he might use it in the Eternal Scroll painting. Now that the fox girl had given them a shot at survival, he cared about little else. His life was obviously more important than the precious token. Whoosh, 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 the fox girl's head was shrouded in the purple shadow containing pure energy. She gingerly raised her hand, her 2 light pink nails intertwined and flicked gently. She seemed to have triggered something that spread from her fingertips. The wildly surging purple shadow was suppressed in an instant and it shrank and disappeared. Walden was in a daze when his chest was suddenly hit by a heavy hammer that sent him into the wall with a thud. He leaned against the wall, his muscles, bones and blood imploding. His entire body was almost completely crushed. His soul hadn't been seriously injured but he only had a single breath left. They don't like eating dead things, the fox girl said, looking at his body, disappointed. She stretched her pink fingers slowly and removed Walden from the wall, dragged him to the hexagram array and threw him from the room. The instant he was thrown, his body split into pieces. The broken pieces turned into pictures and scattered on the white scroll in a gruesome scene. The iron dogs in the upper right corner caught the smell of blood, crawled along the passage and began devouring Walden's broken body. The other shore creatures still in the room trembled violently. They couldn't help but be overtaken by the fear of being fed to the iron dogs. What a strange and horrible skill. We're going to die anyway, let's at least go down fighting. Quote, they mustered the courage that remained in them and charged forward together. The fox girl's face remained unchanged. She tapped her fingers lightly and her pink nails flicked out once more. Bang, 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 waves of immense power pummeled into their chests. None of the other shore creatures, no matter their sizes, had any power capable of counterattacking. They were already on their last gasp when their bodies hit the wall. With another flick of her finger, they too turned into pictures and like Walden, were thrown into the passage to feed the dogs. After disposing of the last of them, she slowly turned towards the room across the corridor. It was time to clear the left room. Chapter 3407, Smash. The doors of these 2 rooms with hexagram arrays were opposite each other. Zen and the others stayed in the room on the left and saw what happened in the other room. All of them blanched in fear at the scene. The fox girl's lips curved into a smile as she knew the other shore creatures in the left room were watching her. I'm coming, she said. Her tempting voice sounded like the final judgment of death, which sent a chill down everyone's spine. Retreat. We have no choice but to fight her. Fight. Even the Blessing Myriad token had no effect on her. Do you have any better ideas than that? The other shore creatures in the right room were by no means weak. They bravely fought back, but they still ended up dead. One of the most terrible things that could happen to anyone was to be unable to do anything in a desperate situation. They silently watched the fox girl step out of the hexagram array, turn into a beautiful painting, and slowly walk towards them while they couldn't think of any solutions at all. What kind of method did she use just now? It looked like she directly dissolved the energy in the Blessing Myriad token, Egan said thoughtfully. He was one of the few people who could remain composed. Of course, Zen also thought hard about the same question. The Blessing Myriad token Walden had summoned was indeed quite powerful. Even if they weren't in the same room, Zen could sense its strength. However, the fox girl didn't fight the Blessing Myriad token directly. Instead, it seemed that she had used a special method to dissolve its energy. But how could she erase such an immense amount of energy in the Blessing Myriad token without a trace? What kind of method was that? I've never seen such a powerful method before. I didn't even know that someone so strong was hiding within the Eternal Scroll painting, the primeval Lord of Heaven commented. If even the knowledgeable primeval Lord of Heaven couldn't understand what method she had used, then it was over. Zen's heart sank in despair. Just then, Egan suddenly said, I have a soul-trapping rope. If I can capture her with it, everything she will do will be useless. A soul-trapping rope. Is that true? At that moment, the miserable other shore creatures in the room quickly lit up with hope. These other shore creatures who had entered the eternal scroll painting were outstanding elites and highly valued in their respective races. Sure enough, they all carried some precious treasures with them. The only problem is if the soul-trapping rope will have any effect on the fox girl, said Egan hesitantly. Whether it will work or not, we still have to try, Zen said determinedly as his fighting intent rose in his chest. According to his rich experience in fighting in desperate situations, those who were indecisive and hesitant always lost and died. On the other hand, they could still have a chance of survival if they launched a counterattack against the odds. Okay then, Egan said with just as much resolution. Then, he took 2 steps forward and shook his right hand. A golden rope appeared on his arm and coiled around it like a snake. As for Zen, he retreated to a side and stood beside the hexagram array. Since the fox girl was a creature who lived in the eternal scroll painting, she must be somehow different from them. Whether ordinary methods were effective against her or not was an important question, but they practically had no other choice at the moment. Meanwhile, the remaining other shore creatures retreated to the back of the room. This is useless. She's just too invincible. We all will die. We will truly die here today. After they witnessed the horrible scene in the other room, they lost their will to fight. They believed that it was useless to counterattack like what Zen and Egan did. Zen, I have a treasure that will protect you well, offered Kirk, who managed to conquer his fear. In his hand was a small purple gourd. He pointed the gourd towards Zen and Egan as he spoke, then its opening emitted shimmering light films. The rays of light floated in the air and gathered around Zen and Egan. This is the heavenly gourd robe. It can help you withstand 50,000 divine megatons of force, explained Kirk. 50,000 divine megatons of force was a substantial amount of energy. If Kirk's treasure and a holy soul's chaotic source spirits were combined, then it would be enough to block an ordinary eternal realm master's attacks. Evidently, the heavenly gourd robe was an extraordinary other shore token. Zen and Egan held their breaths in concentration. The fox girl on the ground slowly moved into the room and approached the hexagram array. She turned from a painting into a living creature, and her attractive figure quickly materialized in front of them. Do it, Zen commanded in a low voice. With a flick of Egan's hand, the soul-trapping rope slipped from his arm and wrapped around the fox girl's body. As soon as the soul-trapping rope wrapped around the fox girl, Zen's body unleashed his strength. Driven by tremendous power, his fist collided against the fox girl's head like a hammer to a nail. In turn, all the other creatures in the room were stunned into silence. The blessing myriad token that Walden had just summoned was quite powerful, but Zen's punch contained nearly half of the same force. Did it mean that his physical strength was on par to half the power of the blessing myriad token? Weren't Eternal Realm Masters the only ones who possessed such a level of strength? All of the creatures present came to the Eternal Scroll painting with the desire to reach the Eternal Realm, but Zen was already as strong as an Eternal Realm Master. However, their current situation was extremely critical. Although everyone was shocked at Zen's display of strength, they were still worried about the fox girl and not him. Would his punch be enough to kill her? The fox girl, who was bound by the soul-trapping rope, did not have time to react before she saw a massive fist smash down her head. Boom! Zen's eyes widened to the size of saucers when his fist hit the fox girl's skull. It worked. It seemed that the fox girl truly lost her powers and thurgies after the soul-trapping rope bound her. Zen's fist broke her skull open, then blood and brains gushed out of it. Although half of her head was gone, she was still alive. She raised her right hand and crossed 2 fingers together. It turned out that she wanted to use her strange thurgy. Crack, crack. In return, Zen quickly twisted her slender arms and ruthlessly broke her bones in the process. That way, he prevented her from unleashing the strange law power from her fingertips. It was a critical moment, so Zen naturally didn't show any mercy. After he broke her arms, he threw another punch to her chest. The strong force hit her chest so hard that it sent her petite body flying backward. Because the hexagram array was in her path, she turned back into a painting on the ground as she flew out of the room. Finally, she hit the wall opposite the room, and her mangled body was torn into pieces. The painting she turned into was no longer in a human shape but scattered on the ground like a broken sack. On the other hand, Egan still tightly held on to the other end of the soul-trapping rope. Half of the rope was in its normal form, while the other half was entangled with the broken pieces of the painting outside the room. Is she dead? Egan asked cautiously. Even if Zen's attacks had mutilated the fox girl's body, he didn't dare retrieve the soul-trapping rope until he confirmed she was dead. If she was a normal other shore creature, she should have died, Zen said with a frown. He had crushed her head and pierced her chest. Even an Eternal Realm Master would have died from such serious injuries. Those other shore creatures who had given up also stared at her damaged body on the ground. Zen's counterattack completely turned the tables, and they started to see the hope in survival. However, their optimism only lasted for several seconds. About 10 seconds later, the broken limbs suddenly moved. Chapter 3408, Glazed Body. Everyone's heart stopped when they saw the broken limbs on the ground suddenly move. Was she still alive? Creatures that had reached the true God realm possessed immensely strong and persistent life energy. To lose hands, legs, and even internal organs wasn't a big deal. However, even when warriors reached the other shore realm, their two most important body parts, namely the soul and the cinnabar field, couldn't sustain serious injuries. If their cinnabar field was destroyed, they would lose all their cultivation. If it was their soul, then they would die. None of the creatures Zen had encountered could break such a rule. Even the blood spirit tortoise, one of the top 10 ferocious beasts of the chaos, was no exception. It would die like the others if its soul of light was damaged. Just now, Zen showed no mercy at all to the fox girl, with the only desire to kill her. His powerful attack had crushed her into pieces, but she was still alive. She is fine. What kind of monster is she? Her soul was not hurt at all. This is impossible. At first, everyone assumed that Zen and Egan had killed the fox girl. They felt ecstatic as they thought that they could finally escape death, but now, it didn't seem like it. The maimed limbs on the ground moved slowly, and at the same time, the black clumps merged and reconstructed. By the time the pool of black clumps and body parts reached the door of the room, it already took the shape of the fox girl. She's back, Egan said bitterly. Then let's do it again, Zen answered indifferently. In any case, there was no other efficient way to deal with the fox girl now. If they could still tear her to pieces, then they would do it all over again. There was no way the fox could be reborn infinitely. Egan had already pulled back his soul-trapping rope. However, when the fox girl entered the hexagram array again, he quickly tossed the soul-trapping rope to bind her once more. At the same time, Zen suddenly unleashed his power and blasted it towards the fox girl. However, the fox girl's body now shone with a glassy luster. Her snow-white skin became translucent, and her body became extraordinarily strong after her transformation. Bang! The moment she saw Zen's fist coming at her, she had already raised her hand and smoothly grabbed it. She had effortlessly blocked a punch that contained 80,000 divine megatons of force. Do you think the rope can trap me? The fox girl grabbed his fist with one hand and the soul-trapping rope with the other. It can't. Egan narrowed his eyes. He already had a bad feeling when he saw the fox girl's skin become a glazed color. If the soul-trapping rope had restrained her, she wouldn't be able to change into such a state. The only possible explanation was that the rope had lost its effect on her. At that point, the fox girl grabbed the soul-trapping rope and slightly pulled it. The other end of the rope slipped from Egan's grip, and then she casually threw it on the ground. Her big eyes shifted to Zen, and a smile graced her translucent face. You haven't given up yet. The rest gave up already. Most of the other shore creatures in the room lost their will to fight. They either pinned their hopes on Zen, who still fought, or waited for death. Only Egan and Kirk looked determined to battle. However, the man in front of her was completely different. His eyes burned with fire, and although he was silent, his fighting spirit fiercely surged inside him. He had no intention of giving up. Why should I give up? He shot back. He opened his eyes and put his hand on the fox girl's shoulder. After the fox girl's body became translucent, it became smooth and extremely tough. Zen tightly grasped her shoulder and swept her off the ground, then forcefully threw her behind him. Boom! The energy waves from the impact spread out in all directions. Those other shore creatures who leaned against the wall felt that it was so strong that they could hardly breathe. The instant civilization had built the room that contained the hexagram array using rules, and it was almost unbreakable. Since the ground was quite solid, it caused a loud collision. However, the fox girl with the glazed body did not have any cracks on her body. Her body still remained upside down and she looked at Zen with a mocking smile. 90,000 divine megatons of force. Is this your limit? She sneered. In a close combat, Zen could release about 200,000 divine megatons of force. The only thing was, his chaotic source spirits would be temporarily exhausted. Although the time was short, it was still quite dangerous. Therefore, he made sure that he released no more than 100,000 divine megatons of force. As he looked at the fox girl's mocking expression, he kicked her high into the air. Then, he bent down and released a large amount of force. Afterward, he threw another punch at her chest. Boom. In turn, the fox girl flew away and slammed into the wall. She landed beside another shore creature who trembled violently in fear. If she had hit him, then he would have died already. That's not enough, the fox girl said with a taunting smile. She was getting serious in killing him. At that moment, her body's translucent glazed color gradually faded away. Zen gently raised his left hand and winked at Egan. Egan. Swish. A gust of wind blew as the soul-trapping rope wound around her body once again. As soon as the soul-trapping rope tied the fox girl, her face froze for a moment. She hurriedly put her slender index finger and thumb together, but she couldn't trigger the power of the thurgy. The soul-trapping rope had taken effect. Her eyebrows shot up as her somewhat childish face sneered. She felt humiliated now that they saw through her. Very good, since you want to die more miserably, I'll satisfy you. She scowled. It turned out that the soul-trapping rope worked after all. At the very least, it stopped her from putting her fingers together and using the strange thurgy. She could still turn into her glazed form but was unable to use the thurgy. It was Zen's idea. Earlier, when the fox girl had snatched the soul-trapping rope and threw it on the ground, he secretly asked Egan to pick it up through his chaotic energy. Even though he didn't know what tricks and thurgies the fox girl had up her sleeves, he couldn't withstand the strange power she released when she put her index finger and thumb together. With the help of the soul-trapping rope, he could at least prevent her from using that kind of thurgy. Just then, her skin turned into the glazed color again. At the same time, she stretched out her hand then tried to snatch the soul-trapping rope. Fortunately, Egan was very smart. He pulled back the soul-trapping rope in time and watched over the fox girl vigilantly. He knew that it was a life-and-death battle, so he was not afraid of offending her. In that case, I'll just kill you. The fox girl didn't want to play the seesaw game with Egan. Her face became filled with rage, and she immediately stabbed the head of the other shore creature beside her with her glazed hand. Pop! The head of the other shore creature exploded like a watermelon. In the next moment, her petite body, which didn't reach Zen's chest, crashed against him. Boom! As a result, Zen was thrown away and crashed against the wall on the other side. The fox girl was very confident in her glazed body, and that was exactly what he wanted. Chapter 3409, Breaking the Defense. When Zen hit the wall, he turned over to give the fox girl a surprise attack. Boom! A loud rumble that came after almost deafened Zen. After slamming into the wall, the fox girl turned around expressionlessly. Your reaction speed isn't bad, but it's not nearly impressive. Zen's face darkened before his body turned over once again. But the fox's speed was far superior to Zen's. Before he could move, a hand grabbed his arm. Whoosh! The fox lifted him up like nothing and threw him right back down to the ground. Boom, boom, boom. The two had extremely tough bodies, carrying terrifying strength. Every time Zen smashed into the ground, an invisible shockwave would spread. Those other shore creatures also became smart. As long as the two of them had any tendency of getting near them, they would hide far away, afraid of being hurt from the impact. With such a terrifying power, anyone who was hit by the slightest shockwave would die or at least get crippled. Every time the fox girl threw Zen down, the other shore creatures trembled. While they feared the fox, they were all the more amazed by Zen. No wonder both the Nihility race and the Element Spirit race wanted him. The guy's body was extremely strong indeed. Egan, on the other hand, seemed worried. While Zen's physical body was undoubtedly strong, he couldn't withstand the situation if it was prolonged. Regardless of what kind of thurgy Zen used to stabilize his body, the fox's brute force was going to break it sooner or later. Bang, bang, the heavenly gourd robe Kirk released was highly unique. While it could withstand 50,000 divine megatons of force, it carried an important feature: it could be reborn infinitely. Each time the fox girl smashed Zen into the ground and the impact exceeded the 50,000 divine megatons limit, the heavenly gourd robe instantly shattered. But just when she lifted Zen up, the heavenly gourd robe instantly wrapped around Zen's entire body once again. In turn, the heavenly gourd robe could actually be regarded as an enhanced version of the chaotic source spirits. Naturally, the heavenly gourd robe wasn't comparable to the chaotic source spirits in Zen's body. Its only shortcoming was that there was a time limit to its use. When the heavenly gourd robe and the chaotic source spirits worked together to protect Zen's body, the latter could withstand 150,000 divine megatons of force directly. The fox girl had used only 100,000 divine megatons of force in the first few strikes, bearing no damage to Zen. But once she confirmed just how strong his body was, the fox girl didn't hesitate to increase the strength of her strikes. 110,000 divine megatons of force. 120,000 divine megatons of force. 130,000 divine megatons of force. She figured Zen could only bear up to 90,000 divine megatons of force because that was the most power he displayed in his previous attacks. But it was becoming clear to her just how high Zen's tolerance was. Still, she knew he was not completely invincible. If she continued increasing the power of her strikes one at a time, sooner or later, she knew she was going to shatter him to pieces. 140,000 divine megatons of force. Boom! When Zen hit the ground, there was a sharp noise that resounded along with a loud rumble of impact. The moment he hit the ground, Zen twisted his body suddenly like he was holding onto a wooden pole. He then grabbed the fox's glazed arm with both hands and feet. 150,000 divine megatons of force was his limit. Once the attack exceeded the limit of what his body could bear, the chaotic source spirits would grow fatigued enough that his body could take damage. He absolutely had to fight back. Just as he grabbed the fox girl's arm, ready to throw her back, the fox sneered, looking at him pitifully. She was by no means inferior to Zen when it came to controlling strength. When he leaned back, about to throw her out, the fox turned the situation around and rolled over agilely in the air, grabbing Zen. Whoosh! Simultaneously, she landed and lifted Zen high in the air, ruthlessly throwing him to the wall. Her movements were highly skillful. She made no unnecessary movements. Boom! The power that erupted from the impact had already reached 160,000 divine megatons. The heavenly gourd robe and chaotic source spirits helped bear 150,000 divine megatons of force. The extra 10,000 had to be borne by Zen's physical body. His myriad tribulations body had 9 bone tribulation imprints. He was by no means weak. When he forcefully resisted the power of 10,000 divine megatons, he could only feel his blood roiling inside him and nothing else. Huh, you can withstand 160,000 divine megatons of force, I see. Let's continue, then. The fox walked toward him threateningly. The smile she wore could easily be an innocent one, save for the terrifying threat hidden underneath. The other shore creatures knew Zen's body was strong, but they didn't know exactly what sort of great power he was enduring. Hearing just how powerful the force was made them gasp in disbelief. Just how powerful was this man? Even after being smashed into the ground so many times, his body remained intact. 170,000 divine megatons of force. Before she even finished, she had already grabbed Zen's neck with her hand. Initially, Zen wanted to dodge, but the fox already saw through him. Shifting a foot in one direction, she caught him with accuracy. At this moment, Zen grew anxious. If the chaotic source spirits were not exhausted, they could be continuously repaired. But recovering from fatigue could take a while. If he used his physical body to withstand the power of 170,000 divine megatons of force, even with the help of the heavenly gourd robe, it would far exceed his limit. Crack! Power burst out of Zen's arms, passing under the fox's arms and ready to lift her up. When she was in the air, her feet swept past Zen's head and suddenly kicked into the wall. Under the great counterforce, she once again grabbed Zen in the air, ready to smash him into the ground. Repair. Fear surfaced in Zen's eyes. The truth aura within his body was constantly surging. If the chaotic source spirits weren't repaired, the attack could easily shatter him to pieces. As he fell to the ground, the chaotic source spirits in his body lit up once again before recovering. Boom! Zen's body had to withstand the extra 20,000 divine megatons of force. His face turned red as his blood and energy surged radically. Your body protection theurgy can't withstand it anymore, I see. The fox girl looked condescendingly down upon Zen. The slight change in Zen's body could easily go unnoticed by anyone else, but not the fox girl. It seems your limit should be 150,000 divine megatons of force. The further we go, the more difficult you'll find it to bear the power. I'd better send you to your death in one go. 200,000 divine megatons of force. In truth, Zen could actually bear exactly 200,000 divine megatons of force. But after the chaotic source spirits grew completely tired, the limit was reduced by 100,000 divine megatons. When she increased her power to 200,000 divine megatons, she had every intention to kill him. The chaotic source spirits in Zen's body were still fatigued when the fox's attack was falling. How could they dare to face it? And so Zen held his breath and shifted his body a foot away. Puff! The fox's glazed hand stabbed into Zen's chest, making blood spurt out like a sharp arrow. A long-lost feeling of pain rose in him. After obtaining the chaotic source spirits, no one had ever really managed to hurt him. The fox's hand that pierced Zen's body slashed down, heading for Zen's cinnabar field. She intended to completely destroy his inner world. If she succeeded, he'd lose all contact with his other shore tokens, cutting off his very source of strength. Fortunately, after Zen merged with a chaos ancient god's blood, the bones in his body had undergone a great change. The thick layers of sclerites abruptly blocked her hand. Chapter 3410, One Opportunity. Now that the sclerites were blocking her, the fox girl used her bloody hand to punch Zen in the stomach again. Zen had expected this and twisted his body to avoid the blow. A smile appeared at the corners of the fox girl's mouth. She had thought that Zen's struggle would be in vain. But this time, Zen also kicked at the ground, causing his whole body to be sent flying upwards. The moment he bounced upwards, the tired chaotic source spirits in his body were instantly repaired. With a telltale swish, a cyan feather appeared above Zen's head. The feather was from the civilization artifact of the regal jade civilization. The moment this feather appeared, Zen's agility increased by leaps and bounds. But this was far from enough. Primeval Lord of Heaven. The pages of the human race's blue book began to flip through and then it suddenly stopped, causing the green light somewhere in Zen's inner world to flash. This was a pool built in the sky called the Phoenix Pool. After the Primeval Lord of Heaven had occupied Zen's inner world, he had assigned many tasks to the humans. The Phoenix Pool was one of these tasks. The energy souls of the Primeval Lord of Heaven and the real snake goddess that remained were very weak. They had to make use of the civilization artifact of the human race. The light of the book began to suddenly shimmer, green ripples appearing on the Phoenix Pool. Streaks of green light rushed out of Zen's inner world, blooming from the surface of Zen's body. With the support of the two civilization artifacts, Zen's speed suddenly increased multifold. The fox girl still wasn't taking Zen seriously. She wanted to grab him and dismember him, which, in her opinion, would take her less than 15 seconds. But the moment she made to grasp him, Zen, like a slippery eel, slipped out of her way. Crack! He grabbed the fox girl from behind and threw her to the wall. Boom! The fox girl's body was about to hit the wall when she bent her legs so that she ended up looking like she was striding across the wall. She stood there, horizontal and surprised, and said, "So your speed has increased. But it's still of no use. You can't hurt me with your strength. Your attack is just like a mirage for me." She kicked off the wall and turned her body upside down, aiming at Zen's head. If this kick were to hit him, it would become very difficult for Zen to escape or survive. But thanks to his increased speed, Zen only had to tilt his shoulders slightly to dodge the powerful kick that contained over 100,000 divine megatons of power. The fox girl's attack spiraled out of control and landed on a different creature of the other shore. The room of the hexagram array was not large enough for the other shore creature to escape the attack. And by the time he had realized the danger he was in, it was too late. Pop! The back of the fox girl's foot swept across the head of the other shore creature, causing it to explode into bubbles of blood. The other shore creature was now a headless corpse that shook violently for a while before falling to the ground. Blood flowed from the gaping hole in his neck. The other creatures of the other shore trembled like rabbits coming face to face with a wolf. They didn't dare resist, only praying that Zen would kill this monster. They couldn't react and move fast enough. Even if they remained curled up in the corner, they would be injured or killed during the battle if they didn't pay attention. This was worse than risking their lives and fighting the battle. On the other hand, two other shore creatures had used their unique methods. One of them had turned his body into a grayish-brown poisonous mist. He did not think his poisonous mist could defeat the fox girl, and had only used it to protect himself. The other one curled up in a corner the size of a fist, which made him a much more difficult target to attack. Zen finally got a chance to breathe after his speed increased. Before the chaotic source spirits recovered, he hadn't wanted to take on the fox girl. He had just relied on his nimble body to dodge her. But he had begun to do his own analyses during this time. The fox girl's strength had increased almost every time she had attacked. And now, her strength was close to 200,000 divine megatons. This meant that she could withstand a power of 200,000 divine megatons with her physical body. The limit of the explosive strength from Zen's physical body was only 200,000 divine megatons. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to shatter the fox girl's glazed body. Boom, boom, Zen's body floated, narrowly avoiding the fox girl's attacks. Her strength had now increased to 220,000 divine megatons. Perhaps it was because of her incomparably strong body that the fox girl's attacks became more and more formidable with every strike. It's no use dodging this way. The fox girl sighed as she chased after him. Even if I gave you the chance to fight back, what could you do? The limit of power that my physical body can bear is far beyond your imagination. She was of the opinion that even if she stood there and let Zen attack her at his full power, Zen probably wouldn't be able to injure her. After the chaotic source spirits had recovered, Zen had seized the opportunity and landed quite a few punches on the fox girl. His strength was controlled, at about 90,000 divine megatons, and his attack could not cause any harm to her. Bang! Zen moved behind her and kicked her back again. The kick contained nearly 100,000 divine megatons of power, but she blocked it quite easily. Egan and the others looked on in despair. If Zen had displayed his full strength, they would be doomed this time. After all, Zen could not hurt his opponent. And in this narrow room, Zen would fail sooner or later, and one failure meant death. You should be able to control more than 100,000 divine megatons of power. Why don't you use it? The fox girl blocked Zen's attack and smiled as she turned around to grab him. But Zen had already floated away, avoiding the attack by inches. Zen seemed abnormally calm in this battle. There was still a chance as he could use the celestial spear. When he had been in stage 31 of the other shore, Zen had let Libby keep the celestial spear that he had obtained. Before entering the eternal scroll painting, Zen returned in the form of the soul of light and took it back from Libby. With the 3 purities stone, he fused his soul with his body. He could thus also use the Sumeru space owned by his soul of light. Or do you think you have a trump card that will help you fight back and defeat me? The fox girl was suddenly reluctant to kill Zen. She had hunted many low-level creatures in the eternal scroll painting that were weak and vulnerable in her eyes. But the human being before her was the only one who had fought her for so long. He had probably been able to hold on for so long because they were fighting in the room of hexagram array. But he was still outstanding for holding his own while fighting her. Whoosh! If you have any powerful skills, use them quickly, or you won't stand a chance. The fox girl jumped 100 feet as she spoke, and then, with a sudden kick of her legs, swooped down on Zen. She used her own body as a weapon. She had used this method a number of times before, and every time, her attack had been formidable and threatening. Zen had had no choice but to escape. But Zen stayed put this time. He merely took a step back before an azure square appeared in his hand. He had barely pulled the celestial spear from the square when a hysterical voice rang out from his throat and echoed across the room. I'll do what you want. Chapter 3411, Walls. By then, the celestial spear had returned to its peak, capable of increasing Zen's strength 9-fold. If Zen now went all out and unleashed 200,000 divine megatons of force, the blow would be as powerful as 1,800,000 divine megatons of force, a truly terrifying figure. But he only had one shot at it and so had to be very precise. He exercised great patience when fighting the fox girl, and now he waited for his final opening. Buzz! The power of 200,000 divine megatons surged along his arms like a vigorous tide. The chaotic source spirits could now only bear 100,000 divine megatons of force, while Zen's physical body would have to bear the remaining 100,000 divine megatons of force. Consequently, 100,000 divine megatons was actually his body's limit. Crack, crack, crack. Faint cracking noises came from within him as he brandished the celestial spear. He was at his limit and his body was struggling to bear such great force, and so thin cracks began appearing on his bones. If he remained in this extreme state for much longer, his body could collapse. But the celestial spear had already been drawn towards the fox girl. With 200,000 divine megatons of force contained in the attack, the celestial stone embedded in the tip of the spear emitted intense light and an indescribably heavy pressure was exerted on it. As Zen waved the spear around, its shaft was pressed into the shape of a full moon. Whoosh! The other shore creatures felt a strong wind whip and cut at their faces. They tried to dodge the intense pain, but there was nowhere in the room to escape to. From the very beginning, the fox girl had never viewed Zen as her opponent, as capable of challenging her, and she certainly had never thought he would pull out a weapon such as this. The power she felt from the tip of the celestial spear changed everything and wiped a look of pure shock across her glazed face. She could not accurately deduce the celestial spear's power, but she knew that if she was hit by a strike from it, she would most definitely die. Her body was in an incredibly powerful state. Under normal circumstances it was impossible to break. But once the power climbed too high, breaking a single spot would shatter her entire body. Egan and Kirk were awestruck at what they saw. They hadn't expected Zen to still have a trump card like this hidden up his sleeve. The celestial spear was about to strike the fox girl when suddenly, a huge hand drew a line into the no-break maze. The line just so happened to be drawn in the room Zen was in. The line was nothing but a black mark on the eternal scroll painting. But in the room, between Zen and the fox girl, a wall had been added, and the celestial spear carrying a power as high as 1,800,000 divine megatons hit it. Boom! A deafening boom rang out and the entire no-break maze trembled under the massive force. The two evil Orochis blocking the way were rattled too. They held great power themselves, and so any power stronger than theirs frightened them. The wall was unbreakable but still caved in from the extraordinary force. Even from above the eternal scroll painting, the new line was curved. The crying face was not worried about it being smashed through though. All walls in the no-break maze were a whole. Unless the entire maze was erased, none of the walls would be destroyed. Zen was stunned and frustrated that his strike had been blocked by a wall appearing out of the blue. Regardless of how it had appeared, he now had no other way to fight back against the fox girl. She had planned to close her eyes and wait for death to take her. The sudden appearance of the wall stunned her too. She raised an eyebrow and fell into deep thought. A few moments later, a murderous look appeared on her face. She moved around the wall in an attempt to get at Zen. Zen stepped back, gritting his teeth. The fox girl took 2 steps forward and another wall was placed in front of her. She refused to give up. She stepped back and tried going around the other side. Swish! A third wall appeared, completely blocking her off. The room was now divided into 2. Once the fox girl accepted she was unable to enter the area Zen was in, she helplessly exited the hexagram array and turned into a flat picture. She immediately looked up at the face in the sky, which was constantly changing between crying and smiling. Master Brush Wielder, why did you stop me from killing him? The fox girl asked furiously. Because you had already lost, said the smiling face calmly. If I hadn't done something, he would have smashed you to bits. Why not just help me? She asked, still upset. Ha ha ha, the smiling face chuckled gloomily. The reason I helped you in the first place was because I needed you to do something that was inconvenient for me to do myself, not because you needed help killing people in the passages. If all I want is death, I could do it myself. This revelation left the fox girl speechless. The face gave her and her companions everything they had. What it said made sense. But the fox girl was smart and quickly picked up on something. No, you would not have paid so much attention to me just because you're worried about me. There was no doubt about her strength. It was very unlikely she would encounter any danger she couldn't handle, so the brush wielder would not need to pay so much attention to her. There was nothing he'd have to rescue her from. The only possibility that remained was that he was watching someone else. It was obvious, it was the human boy she had been fighting. The brush wielder was concerned for his safety. Her guess was right, the brush wielder's eyes never left Zen. He wanted to test Zen's limits and see how far he could go, but he had never imagined he would be able to kill the fox girl. At the critical moment, he stepped in and stopped the fight from continuing. Why, is he special? Inquired the fox girl curiously. Yes, the smiling face replied. Is it possible that he may enter the final room? The fox girl's attitude had now shifted. At the least, he passed your test, said the smiling face, turning into a crying face but still with an unusually happy voice. The fox girl fell silent for a moment, feeling that the brush wielder seemed to be acting reasonably. If she put aside his abnormal behavior of silently protecting Zen, she had to admit that the human had indeed defeated her and was even about to kill her. All I know is that he is one we have waited for, but whether he is able to reach the end, I'm unsure, said the crying face slowly. When all is said and done, he is the most likely to reach the end. So, according to our agreement, you will have to talk with him. Got it, sir. The fox girl lay in the eternal scroll painting and returned to the room. Zen and the others were unable to leave because of the several walls that had been put into place. They had no idea what was going on and were all worried about what would happen to them. They were lost in thought when the sound of something being erased scratched in all their ears and the walls quickly vanished before their eyes. The disappearance of the walls displeased them as the fox girl stood in front of them once more. Chapter 3412, The Origin Level Bloodline. The amount of twists and turns perplexed these other shore creatures to the point that they almost went numb from the nervousness. Nobody tried to escape, all they could do was stare at the fox girl with glazed, frozen eyes. It was as if they were no longer concerned with whether she would kill them or not. Their fate had been sealed the moment they entered this trap. All they could do was accept their death with dignity. The fox girl turned her gaze to Zen. This was her home turf, so she had the upper hand, but she still ended up defeated by this man. Was it a matter of luck, perhaps? Nevertheless, whether or not Zen got lucky, she was still defeated, which meant the brush wielder had chosen the right person. She nodded at him pointedly. You, come to me. Zen had just recently restored the chaotic source spirits in his body and was extremely on guard. However, her sudden command still caught him by surprise. "What do you mean? You've defeated me, so I will tell you something," she replied. Zen immediately shook his head. "I refuse." He didn't know what was up with this fox girl. However, he knew for a fact that once he left the room and changed into a painting, then the strength gap between the two of them would grow significantly. He would completely be at her mercy. Seeing Zen's vigilance, the fox girl was at a loss with how to persuade him. After a while, she decided to turn her attention towards the other shore creatures behind him. "You can leave the room now." Since Zen was not willing to come to her, then she would have to empty out the room to privately converse with him. "We're not going anywhere. Those snakes are still guarding outside. If we go out, we're as good as dead." Exactly what he said. It was only after looking at the determined expressions on their faces that the fox girl truly realized how much of a threat they viewed her as. Truth be told, she initially only planned to spare Zen's life since he was the one who defeated her. However, she remembered the brush wielder's words and knew it would be meaningless for her to kill these creatures. "You will leave here safely. I shall remove the evil Orochis and ensure a safe path for you all," she assured them. "Really? You're truly going to let us go? You're not messing with us, right?" Of course, despite her assurance, they still found her words a bit too hard to believe. Having noticed that their suspicions remained unabated, the fox girl decided to send out a command to the evil Orochis that told them to retreat from the upper right corner of the no-break maze. However, even if the two snakes had retreated far away, the creatures still refused to believe in her. There was no way they were going to trust someone with such large amounts of power. The fox girl gritted her teeth from irritation. "I'll give you 10 seconds. If you don't leave, then you leave me no choice but to kill you." Fortunately for her, this ultimatum was enough to send the other shore creatures running. They all stepped past the hexagram array and turned into paintings as they left. Before Egan and Kirk left, they shot one last look at Zen, wishing him luck for whatever the fox girl had in store for him. She didn't seem to have any more intentions of killing anyone, but they weren't sure what she wanted from Zen. Once everyone left and they were finally alone, the fox girl talked to Zen directly. "You've obtained a total of 18 imprints in the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation, right?" "Yes," Zen replied with full honesty. There was no need for him to hide anything or lie since she was already forthright with her question. She smiled and asked another question. "What kind of bloodline do you want to obtain?" The specificity of her question made Zen freeze. According to the primeval Lord of Heaven, the most difficult part of the eternal scroll painting lay on the third page, which was a huge vortex wherein Zen could fully test his own strength. As far as Zen knew, the imprints he had collected could be used to help him explore the vortex. The fox girl's question just now sounded like she was offering Zen whatever bloodline he wanted. Was it really that easy? "Ever since I entered the eternal scroll painting, I have strived to achieve a lot of things. The bloodline I will obtain will just depend on my fate, right?" he replied after thinking about it for a while. As the saying went, man proposes, God disposes, and Zen believed this wholeheartedly. "I want you to go to the end," the fox girl said with a very serious look. "The end," Zen repeated with a scoff of disbelief. "There are so many elder masters who've entered the eternal scroll painting before me. I'm not sure I'm worthy enough of surpassing them and making it to the end." The other shore was almost entirely under the control of the element spirit race, which was already composed of countless elites. To surpass them all would be an incredibly difficult task for Zen. It wasn't a feat he had that much confidence in achieving at the moment. The fox girl's eyes glinted with a hint of annoyance. "I wasn't asking you to surpass those losers. I said I wanted you to go to the end. Do you understand me?" she huffed. "Those guys you mentioned just got the root level bloodline. That's nowhere near enough." Zen raised an eyebrow at the term she just used. "Root level bloodline," he repeated. The primeval Lord of Heaven was quick to rush to his aid. "I've never really heard of this term before. Perhaps it's a definition set for grading bloodlines. We usually separate the large vortex of the eternal scroll painting into the inner and outer circles. The innermost circle has all the best bloodlines. Anyway, let's just hear her out first." It was a good thing that the fox girl no longer held any hostility towards Zen. Bloodlines in that world are divided into 3 levels, with the weakest being the ordinary source level bloodline. All bloodlines in the 16 outer circles of the vortex are all on ordinary source level, while those in the 4 inner circles are on root level, she explained. "That's quite similar to our grading methods." The primeval Lord of Heaven nodded. "There are 16 outer circles and 4 inner circles. The inner ones naturally have better bloodlines than the outer ones. Chiyu, Hui, and a vast majority of Eternal Realm warriors obtained ordinary source-level bloodlines in outer circles. Only a small number of people managed to obtain bloodlines in inner circles. This explanation clarified some things for Zen. However, there was still something that bothered him. You mean to tell me that it isn't enough to obtain a root-level bloodline? He asked. A root-level bloodline was at the same level as those powerful masters in stage 33. Shouldn't that already be enough? It didn't seem to be enough judging from what the fox girl just told him. Zen's words immediately filled her eyes with disappointment. If you came to the eternal scroll painting only to obtain a root-level bloodline, then I'll just end your life right now. The fox girl raised her hand. Her thumb and index fingers were clasped together, and the moment she snapped, Zen would instantly die. She employed the use of a unique law power within this channel, a theurgy bestowed upon her by the brush wielder. Zen couldn't help but secretly roll his eyes at her dramatics. He truly hadn't met a more unreasonable person, but since he knew that she was serious about killing him, he had to submit. He immediately held up his hands in surrender. Wait, I'll try my best to meet your requirement. If you say that the root-level bloodline is not enough, then what's stronger than that? The origin-level bloodline, she told him, finally stretching out her hands. There are 4 kinds of origin-level bloodline inside the room at the very end. You have to get one of them. If you can't, then I'll kill you. The corners of Zen's mouth twitched when he looked at her solemn expression. How did things come to this? Now he wasn't even allowed to get an ordinary bloodline. No, he had to get one of those so-called origin-level bloodlines or risk death. Meanwhile, the primeval Lord of Heaven was lost in thought. As far as he recalled, the bloodlines in the inner circles were the most powerful. So long as Zen obtained one of them, then he would be qualified to establish a force in stage 32 or 33 and guarantee the survival of their race. However, according to the fox girl, there were actually far stronger bloodlines. It was something he had never heard of before. Chapter 3413, The Void Sand. Before stepping out of the room with hexagram array, the fox girl signaled Zen to stand still, and then she gently pressed her white fingers onto Zen's forehead. Zen knew the power her hand possessed was very formidable. As he was about to retreat, 2 of the fox girl's fingers had already touched his forehead, and a wisp of black gas instantly penetrated his head. Zen felt a chill seep into his forehead, but the chill immediately disappeared without a trace. What did you do? Zen asked with a frown. The fox girl shrugged her slender shoulders and explained, I just did you a favor, and now you can move more smoothly in the big vortex. Zen suspiciously stared at the fox girl for a few seconds before he stepped into the hexagram array and turned into a flat picture. The moment Zen became a painting, a strange feeling stirred in him. Previously, after he had transformed into the painting, his angle of sight had been fixed, and he could only view the scenery within a limited range. However, at this moment, his angle of sight had slightly changed. What was happening now? Reflexively, Zen raised his head. He suddenly gazed straight ahead and discovered the end of the eternal scroll painting. Only then did he realize that he was standing on the eternal scroll painting. He was still a painting, but he had turned into a painting that had stood up. This is a skill of the worm taper. Zen was momentarily stunned before he realized what had happened. Both the fox girl and the worm taper could temporarily disappear from the eternal scroll painting, which meant they could jump out of the painting. Right now, he had stepped on the no-break maze. The wall that resembled a line didn't seem to exist to him, and he could cross it with just one leap. If someone saw Zen in the no-break maze, they wouldn't be able to see his whole body, but only the soles of his feet. No wonder the worm taper is so powerful. Its ability is utterly remarkable. Zen immediately understood the creature's ability. In his current form, it was a piece of cake for him to kill the other creatures of the other shore. Those other shore creatures were not in the same league as him at all. They would not even know who attacked them if he stepped on them. Zen no longer moved along the maze's pathways. Instead, he moved to cross the walls and headed straight for the end of the no-break maze. When he reached the gate at the end of the no-break maze, Zen lowered his body back into the painting and moved out through the gate. After passing through the no-break maze, he reached the 3rd page of the eternal scroll painting and drew within sight of the huge vortex, which appeared in the Grand Plain stage. At this point, the other shore creatures in the Grand Plain stage all sighed. It's the Black Disaster. They must have faced it. This time, the Black Disaster is too powerful. Almost all of them have been slain. Only a handful of people survived. Sometimes, the eternal scroll painting was known for being extremely dangerous, and this particular sort of danger was known as the Black Disaster. Every time the Black Disaster materialized, it could cause havoc and completely destroy the other shore creatures. However, the chances of meeting the black disaster were very small, and it had never appeared on the first page before. When most of the other shore creatures perished and only a scraggly few survived, they were convinced that they had met their ends due to the black disaster. This time, those who entered the eternal scroll painting would probably be completely annihilated. At least there is one of our members left. Our race still has some hope, an elder of the life race said. There's no one left of our swallow victory race. It's a great fortune for our Three Eyes race to have 2 warriors still alive. Just as the other shore races were tallying the surviving warriors, someone pointed at the eternal scroll painting and exclaimed, "They're coming out. They're about to enter the vortex." After entering the 3rd page, the shapes of the other shore creatures were clearly visible. Many other shore creatures had materialized at the bottom of the huge vortex. Inside the eternal scroll painting, Egan, Kirk, and the other survivors stood to the side. Instead of entering the vortex immediately, they were quietly checking things out. Something floated in the large vortex, a kind of black sand, which was called the void sand. Occasionally, a grain of void sand floated towards them and hit the bodies of Egan, Kirk, and the others, after which the sand instantly vanished, leaving a sand-sized hole on the surface of their bodies as an agonizing pain filled them. Those who had all entered the eternal scroll painting and reached the big vortex on the 3rd page had an instinctual fear of the void sand. Even those who had already achieved the eternal realm were no exception. Every time they even mentioned the void sand, their expressions would be greatly charged with fear. Some other shore creatures might have been able to cultivate to become eternal realm warriors, but after being tortured by the void sand for some time, they all chose to quit. The void sand could pierce into the physical body of any creature and dissolve it one bit at a time. And the agonizing pain it caused was not something that could be easily borne by most. While they were still quietly watching the big vortex, Zen stepped through the gate of the no-break maze. "Zen, are you okay?" When Egan saw Zen, a pleasantly surprised look appeared on his face. When the other creatures of the other shore laid eyes on Zen, they let out a collective sigh of relief. They were glad that Zen had made it through alive. Although these other shore creatures all had their own viewpoints, Zen had saved their lives in the end. At the very least, they could fight together on the same side here. "I'm fine," Zen replied. "Why haven't you entered the big vortex yet?" "We're waiting for you," Egan said with a bashful smile. In fact, so many terrible things had transpired on the 1st and 2nd pages, so these warriors were all a bit scared. Although there were neither beasts, nor the black disaster on the 3rd page, they were afraid that an accident would happen again. If someone as powerful as Zen could lead them and face the dangers first, it would fill them with a certain sense of security. "In that case, we should go in now," said Zen. He finally reached the final step, so he became a little excited. Before he had taken more than a few steps, a grain of void sand came hurtling at him from the distance and hit the back of his hand. Bah! The moment the grain of sand impacted with Zen's body, it instantly vanished. A sharp and lancing pain instantly pierced him as if a needle had shot right into his soul of light. Although the pain lasted for a short while, it had a burning intensity. It seemed that there was nothing Zen could do to eliminate or avoid it. Is that the void sand? Earlier, the primeval Lord of Heaven had instructed Zen that this large vortex was constructed from a massive amount of void sand, with each grain being able to devour the material it impacted with. If enough void sand were to hit someone, their physical body would be utterly dissolved by the sand. But it didn't seem to faze Zen at all since he had the chaotic source spirits. Zen gently stroked the area where the void sand had hit. With the protection of the chaotic source spirits, his body remained intact and unscathed. It doesn't seem to have had any lingering effect. The chaotic source spirits are really able to block the void sand. The primeval Lord of Heaven also seemed a bit surprised. He then cautioned, "That's indeed good news for you, but don't become careless. The void sand can dissolve more than just your body." "Dissolve my soul." Zen frowned tightly. Although the chaotic source spirits in his body could physically fend off the sand, he didn't have an effective method to protect his soul. Without anything else to rely on, he would only have the protection of the 9 holy soul imprints. Chapter 3414, Imprint Transmission Tower. Da, da, da. The void sand occasionally hit their bodies, and the pain felt like needles pricking their skin. What was worse was that it was both physical and mental pain. It was especially hard for the warrior of the life race on the left since he was highly sensitive to pain. Every time a grain of sand hit him, he gritted his teeth and groaned in agony. It also hurt both Egan and Kirk, but they endured it a lot better. They only frowned and simply put up with it. In comparison, the sand wouldn't quickly erode Zen's body, but he couldn't just get rid of the pain in his soul. After they moved forward for a certain distance, a square appeared on the scroll painting. There was a big hexagram array drawn at the entrance of the square. Their group of 9 entered the hexagram array and returned to their normal state. At that moment, a circular tower appeared in the center of the square. The tower looked only like a simple circle on the scroll painting, but it looked magnificent and lofty in the square. "This is the imprint transmission tower," said Egan as he turned to Zen. "This is the starting point that leads to the big vortex. If you got some imprints while you were in the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation, you can get the corresponding protection from the imprint transmission tower." Zen thought that it was nice of Egan to explain everything to him in detail, as Egan knew that it was his first time to enter the Eternal Scroll painting. Although the primeval Lord of Heaven had already told him about it, he still listened carefully, as Egan explained. In general, ordinary other shore creatures weren't resistant to the void sand's erosion. It was perfectly fine for them to be in the 16 outer circles since there was not much void sand there. However, there was a massive amount of void sand in the deep part of the vortex, and those grains of sand could easily erode them. If they wanted to travel smoothly in the depths of the vortex, they had to rely on the imprint transmission tower. In front of the tower was a member of the Jade Crown race who took the lead to step forward. Buzz. When the warrior approached the imprint transmission tower, his chest, back, and head began to glow. In turn, 7 imprints appeared on the tower. 3 Bone Tribulation imprints and 4 Holy Soul imprints. "That's not bad," said Egan. The 3 Bone Tribulation imprints were exposed, so everyone saw them. The Holy Soul imprints were on one's soul, and they were invisible to the naked eye but easy to figure out. Swish! The imprints on the imprint transmission tower only remained for a short while before they disappeared. Then, a golden light came down from the tower and enveloped the warrior of the Jade Crown race. Now he should be able to reach the 9th circle from the center since 7 layers of imprint light protected his body. "But I can't say for sure if he could do better than that," Kirk commented. "If he has stronger willpower and a faster speed, maybe he could break into the 8th circle," said Egan with a smile. Egan had 9 imprints, which made him an outstanding warrior. His goal was to rush into the 5th circle. He felt a sense of superiority when he saw the 7 imprints of the warrior from the Jade Crown race. After the warrior of the Jade Crown race obtained the protective light, he retreated to the side. The next one who entered was the warrior of the Life race. As soon as he neared the imprint transmission tower, 4 imprints flashed across his body, and 8 imprints on the tower lit up. It meant that he had 4 Holy Soul imprints, and 4 Bone Tribulation imprints, respectively. The warrior felt very proud. He turned his head and announced, "My goal is to enter the 7th circle." It was difficult for a warrior who had 8 imprints to enter the 7th circle, but it was clear that this warrior was determined. Next, Egan and Kirk approached the imprint transmission tower and obtained their protective light. Generally speaking, the more imprints one had, the stronger the protective light the imprint transmission tower gave them. For example, the protective light Egan acquired was much denser than that of the warrior from the Jade Crown race. After nearly all of them received the protective light, only Zen and a member of the Grasshopper race were left. The warrior from the Grasshopper race wasn't tall and remained quiet throughout, and most people ignored him. "It's your turn, Zen," Egan said with a smile. He had 9 imprints, so he was the one with the most imprints among the group. He wanted to see how many imprints Zen had, and the other shore creatures were curious about it as well. Although Zen had shown great strength, it didn't necessarily mean that he had a lot of imprints. However, the warrior from the Grasshopper race suddenly walked towards the imprint transmission tower. Buzz! Just as he approached the imprint transmission tower, the imprints on his body lit up. 13 imprints appeared on the imprint transmission tower. "My goal is to enter the inner circles," he declared. The inner circles were the 4 circles near the center, and the bloodline they could get from there was much stronger than that in the outer circles. That was also the root-level bloodline the Fox girl had mentioned before. 13 imprints were extremely rare, so he was indeed qualified to break through to the inner circles. The Earth Grasshopper of the Grasshopper race actually has 13 imprints. A wise head truly makes a closed mouth. I didn't expect that he had so many imprints. Break through to the inner circles. After we reach the Eternal Realm, he would still be more powerful than us. Some of them were envious, but there was nothing they could do. After all, some things had already been decided when they passed the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation. Although the number of imprints did not mean everything, some special abilities and willpower could fill the gap. But except for a small number of extremely powerful people who could narrow the gap, the others wouldn't be able to do much. Swish! A dazzling beam of protective light appeared around the warrior of the Grasshopper race. The light he released was much more intense than that of Egan, and it was the brightest of all. Now, only Zen was left. The strongest one among us should be the earth grasshopper. Yes, 13 imprints. No one had achieved such an extraordinary feat in a long time. Quote, the performance of the warrior from the grasshopper race caught everyone's attention, so they expected a bit less from Zen's performance. After all, it was hard for him to surpass 13 imprints. After the warrior of the grasshopper race left the imprint transmission power, Zen walked towards it. The moment he neared it, his chest, legs, back, arms, head. All of his body parts glowed with the imprints, light, and so did the tower. 9 bone tribulation imprints of different shapes and 9 holy soul imprints appeared on the tower at the same time. The ray of light was somewhat blinding, and the crowd in the square fell silent. It wasn't until quite a while later that they began to roar. How many imprints are there? 1, 2, 3, 18 imprints. Quote, 18 imprints. Has he achieved complete success in both the Soul City and the land of bone tribulation? The other shore creatures present grew up on the Grand Plain stage, so they had watched the eternal scroll painting unfold over and over again. They were familiar with all sorts of stories about talents, but they had never heard of anyone who had obtained 18 imprints. Zen, is this real? Kirk asked in shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. In turn, Zen just shrugged slightly at Kirk's disbelief. Zen, are you going to break through to the first circle? Egan asked. I'll try my best, Zen answered. The bloodline power in the innermost circle was only at the root level. It naturally didn't meet the requirements of the fox girl, so he could only try his best to explore the vortex and reach the end. Buzz. After the 18 imprints disappeared, the protective light appeared on his body. The layer of protective light was as thick as real armor, and it tightly wrapped around him. Chapter 3415, Complete Erosion. All the creatures present stood still in shock. They had never heard of anyone receiving 18 imprints since the beginning of history, and the protective light that everyone else obtained wasn't as dense as Zen's. Even Zen himself felt that the protective light was too dazzling, and it took him quite a while to get used to it. Meanwhile, the others stared blankly at him for a long time, their eyes filled with envy. That level of protective light would enable him to easily enter the inner circles and even break through to the third or second circle. They all entered the Soul City and passed through the land of bone tribulation, but why was there such a big difference? No wonder both the element spirit race and the nihility race fought tooth and nail for Zen. That was probably the secret reason. On the other side of the square was another big hexagram array. After everyone had acquired protective light, they gathered in front of the hexagram array. From there, they could see the ethereal void sand that floated above the ground. Are we going to rush out together? I can take the lead, Zen offered. However, the people behind him had mixed emotions regarding his suggestion. Zen, you can't do this, Egan said and shook his head. Why not? Naturally, Zen was puzzled. The more people are gathered together, the more intense and severe the void sand's attacks will be, Kirk answered. When the Eternal Scroll painting was first designed, its designer had considered that some warriors might enter the inner circles in groups. After all, if someone powerful took the lead, then everyone behind him would benefit from it. Furthermore, it would be too easy for the weak ones to enter the inner circles. There were a few who had tried to do it before, but when multiple people attempted it, the void sand in the vortex gathered like mad and became harder to resist. From then on, everyone learned their lesson and entered the big vortex one by one. But this protective light, Zen felt that the protective light was quite powerful, but to maintain such a powerful state consumed a lot of energy. Thus, he was afraid that the protective light could only last for a limited time. Don't worry, Zen, as long as you stay inside the square, the protective light won't weaken, Egan assured him. Upon hearing those words, Zen didn't say anything more. Besides, it wasn't the first time these people entered the Eternal Scroll painting. They gained their experiences from the many generations before them, so what they said shouldn't be wrong. Then I'll go first, the member of the life race declared. He went forward and stepped on the hexagram array, then transformed into a picture and rushed forth. All the eyes of the other shore creatures in the Grand Plain stage were on him. The members of the life race, in particular, even shouted and cheered. The last remaining member of the life race had 8 imprints, which included 4 holy soul imprints and 4 bone tribulation imprints. The more balanced his corporeal body and soul were, the more even his protective light would be. Lionel will certainly get a good result. His goal is to enter the 7th circle. He'll surely be able to make it. I believe in Lionel's strength. At that point, the member of the life race ran wildly in the big vortex. As soon as he left the square, the void sand began to rush towards him. More than a dozen pieces of the void sand hit his chest at the same time, but the protective light immediately dissolved them. But of course, some of the protective light was dissolved as well. Fortunately, it wasn't an issue for concern. With the protection of the protective light, the outermost circle of the big vortex didn't obstruct him at all. He had already passed through it in only 5 minutes. Then, he went through the 19th circle, the 18th circle, the 17th circle. The creatures in the Grand Plane stage saw what was happening, but Zen and the others couldn't. They only saw a golden light dot quickly ran on the ground in the distance. Not long after, the member of the life race had reached the 10th circle. Some hexagram arrays were sparsely scattered on the ground outside the 10th circle. Then, behind each hexagram array was a round room. If this member of the life race wanted to obtain a bloodline, he could choose a hexagram array and enter the room behind it. However, this member of the life race named Lionel had long aimed for the 7th circle and did not intend to compromise. The moment he entered the 9th circle, a large amount of void sand hit him. The void sand eroded his protective light up to the point that its golden glow was fading at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. It seems that Lionel's protective light is quite weak. Perhaps it truly is difficult to maintain the protective light until he reaches the 7th circle. The life race was a race that had gone through all kinds of hardships. Although they were under the element spirit race's protection, they were weak and undervalued. The other races always abused them, and until now, only their leader was at the eternal realm. As Lionel grew up, he swore to himself that he would become a mighty warrior of the eternal realm, and explore stage 33 of the other shore to revive their life race. Because of his great ambition, he had worked hard. The 8th circle. Once he entered the 8th ring, the protective light on his body became very weak. Logically speaking, the 8th circle should be his destination at that point. However, he refused to stop there. Since he decided that he would enter the 7th circle, then he wouldn't give up until he made it. The deeper he went, the stronger the bloodline he would get. Thus, he convinced himself that he had to do his best and reach his limit. If he couldn't even do that, then how could he revive his race? When he was halfway through the 8th circle, however, his protective light completely disappeared. Without the protective light, things would get very complicated and dangerous for him. Lionel, please choose a bloodline already. Your protective light is gone. The other members of the life race shouted repeatedly, but they couldn't transmit their voices from the Grand Plane stage to the eternal scroll painting. Besides, based on Lionel's mentality, he wouldn't stop even if he heard them. The void sand hit his arms, chest, belly, and legs, and left countless sand-sized pits. The intense pain was like thousands of needles that stabbed into his soul of light. If he had a weaker will, then he would have passed out from the pain by now. He continued to rush forward with gritted teeth as his arms covered his face. By the time he reached the 7th circle, the void sand had eroded more than half of the arm that covered his face. The bones inside it broke, then his arm completely fell off his shoulder. His legs were also damaged, so he could only limp forward. The members of the life race kept shouting in the Grand Plane stage. They saw that his picture in the eternal scroll painting became increasingly smaller until it almost stumbled forward on the ground. Eventually, Lionel still managed to crawl into the 7th circle. As soon as he entered it, however, a swarm of void sand submerged him, and he disappeared into the depths of the great vortex. The void sand had devoured and eroded every tissue of his body. Chapter 3416, Results. The light at the far end gradually disappeared and Egan said in thought, "The man from the life race has failed." "Failed? What makes you say that?" asked Zen surprised. He didn't know how Egan had come to this conclusion. When they were observing in the square, all they could see was a dot of light spinning in the distance before finally disappearing. If he had entered a room and fused with the bloodline, a blazing light would have flashed. But now, the protective light has disappeared but there is still no blazing light shining, which means he hasn't entered a room, Egan explained. "He was trying too hard," commented Kirk while shaking his head. In fact, the big vortex on the 3rd page was relatively safe. As long as one's body was not totally eroded, they would be able to take their pick of a nearby room to obtain the bloodline and reach the eternal realm smoothly. But some people got too greedy and chose to go further even without possessing the necessary strength. "Let me have a go." The member of the Jade Crown race then came forward. He stepped into the hexagram array and quickly left the square, sprinting towards the depths of the big vortex. About 10 minutes later, his protective light was falling dimmer and dimmer. Then, a blazing light shot into the sky. The member of the Jade Crown race had already chosen a room to enter. After fusing with the bloodline, he reached the Eternal Realm. That was quite a rational decision. From what I see, he is probably in the 9th circle, matching the strength of the imprints he had obtained, Egan said, nodding to Kirk. It was Kirk's turn to enter the vortex. Kirk had obtained 7 imprints, just like the man of the Jade Crown race, and he didn't overextend himself either. After reaching the 9th circle, he simply chose and entered a room with a hexagram array. Several other shore creatures then followed suit. Perhaps the tragedy of the member of the life race sucked away their will to gamble. They no longer dared grit their teeth and fight head-on. Most of them had each chosen a room with a hexagram array while the protecting light still shone. Egan was the third to last to enter the big vortex. The protective light released by the 9 imprints guaranteed to take him further. In the end, he reached the expected 6th circle. In the Grand Plain stage, the members of the Three Eyes race were overjoyed. Despite the outbreak of the Black Disaster, they still had 2 members successfully enter the Eternal Realm. Even more special was that Egan himself had reached his goal and made it into the 6th circle. They naturally felt proud and honored. The 6th circle is probably the pinnacle of the Eternal Scroll painting this time, right? A member of the Three Eyes race asked, filled with pride. The disciples of the larger races had died on either the first or second page and lost their chance to compete. But just then, another began rushing along the big vortex. The person was very small. He was from the Grasshopper race. This race was even more inconspicuous than the life race in the Grand Plain stage and was not held in high esteem by outsiders. But when the other members of the Grasshopper race saw one of their own appear, they stood and watched expectantly. It had been many years since their race had produced such a talent. It would definitely increase the strength of the entire race by 1 level if he could enter an inner circle and reach the Eternal Realm. Many other shore races looked on indifferently. The member of the Grasshopper race passed through circles, entered the 4th circle directly and obtained a bloodline there. He did more impressively than seemed possible for this race. Bloodlines in the inner circles were on the root level. Since ancient times, very few had obtained one. Perhaps only one had entered an inner circle in the thousands of times the Eternal Scroll painting had opened. Many other shore races were then shocked to see what the member of the Grasshopper race had achieved. A small, unknown race actually had a figure entering an inner circle. This would no doubt change the fate of their race. However, some of the other races close to the Grasshopper race were not pleased. There was much competition and many disputes between them and the Grasshopper race, and so they did not want to see such an impressive talent popping up. Why hasn't Zen gone yet? His turn should be soon. He's the last to go. Pierce and the others were all in the Grand Plain stage. Every time the Eternal Scroll painting opened was like a grand banquet, but they always missed it as they were from the source world. Zen had come with 18 imprints. He wondered what expressions this would inspire. When Zen saw the blazing light soaring into the sky in the distance, he stepped into the hexagram array and turned into a flat painting, moving forward along the big vortex without hesitation. Even after he had turned into a painting, his protective light was still intensely bright. As the protective light blocked the void sand, he moved forward easily. He encountered almost no resistance in the first 16 circles. A while later and he had successfully entered the 4th circle. Zen had also garnered a lot of attention, but the element spirit races and the nihility races' interests in him had already proved he was extraordinary. His entering an inner circle was almost expected and inevitable. It would, after all, be ridiculous if the one selected by both Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven could not even enter an inner circle. Zen had no time to relax when he entered the 4th circle. Once there, the size and density of the void sand increased greatly and rushed towards him wildly, consuming his protective light. Although it was indeed very strong, it still would not be able to hold on much longer. But the closer the circle to the center, the shorter the distance there was to travel through. Without pausing, Zen advanced rapidly along the path through the big vortex. The 4th circle, the 3rd circle, the 2nd circle. All the other shore creatures in the Grand Plain stage stared silently. They watched as he smoothly entered the inner circles, their expressions shifting with increasing amazement with his every advancement. The gap between the Eternal Warriors was decided the moment they reached the Eternal Realm. The warriors in the outer circles were all at the ordinary Eternal Realm, while those who managed to make their way to the inner circles were capable of becoming the leaders of powerful races. Of course, they would most likely be recruited straight into the element spirit race or the nihility race. As for those who entered the 3rd or even 2nd circle, they would be powerful forces in exploring stage 33. By then, they could even dominate a territory. and the strongest would enter the innermost circle in the center of the vortex. These creatures had the potential to compete to be the strongest existence on the other shore. Now that Zen had effortlessly stepped into the second circle and still showed no signs of slowing down, it seemed that he would rush into the innermost circle. It's no wonder the two great races would fight for him. They already knew what he was capable of. He reaches the first circle. Up until now, there have only been 11 kinds of holy level bloodlines. I wonder if he will obtain the 12th. Some other shore races referred to the bloodlines provided in the innermost circle as the holy level bloodlines. These were also regarded as the best. But this was a controversial view. After all, there were some incredibly powerful figures that did not rank high in the eternal scroll painting. Thus it was believed that the difference in bloodlines from the 4 inner circles was not that great. Chapter 3417, Surpassing. Under the other shore creatures' gaze, Zen rushed right into the innermost circle. There, the void sand was dark purple, having stronger corrosivity than that in outer circles. As though it had its own intelligence, the sand flew all over the sky, swarming toward Zen like a cloud of bloodthirsty mosquitoes. Buzz. The once solid protective light then began swaying violently like candlelight flickering in strong gusts of wind. Now, it could be extinguished at any given moment. If it weren't for the fox girl's special requirement, Zen might have already chosen to stop at this point. A bloodline in the innermost circle had met his initial expectations, after all. To the left nearby Zen lay a hexagram array. Once he entered it, he'd be able to arrive safely at the room behind it, where a strange, flat pattern would be awaiting him. It likely had something to do with obtaining a bloodline. But the fox girl's warning lingered in Zen's ears. He had no choice but to obey her. If he wanted to pass through the innermost circle smoothly, he had to speed up. I just have to charge without stopping. While he attempted to quicken his pace, the void sand reacted even more intensely, preventing him from advancing altogether. Numerous clouds of void sand seemed to have materialized, forming a great monster that enveloped Zen, leaving no space for him to escape. Countless grains of this unique sand counteracted Zen's protective light, corroding it in the field. Zen's protective light merely continued to shrink and dim. I can't hold on for much longer, Zen muttered with a frown. As he watched the sand dance along the surface of the painting, a thought suddenly sparked in his head. He then tried to lift his entire presence out of the eternal scroll painting, leaving behind only his feet. What happened? Did he just leave his feet behind? Is it possible that maybe the sand already eroded the rest of his body? The other shore creatures observing him speculated and bemoaned regretfully. The members of the Three Eyes race glanced at the Oneness Sky Palace's people pitifully. What a shame, he should have chosen to integrate with a bloodline the moment he reached the innermost circle. Alas, maybe the boy was just far too greedy for a good rank. But the rankings in the inner circles don't matter all that much. He's still too young and doesn't know when to give up. This human's failure is far more regrettable than that of the warrior from Life race. He could have become an excellent master. Meanwhile, Pierce, Auden, Libby, and the rest of the Oneness Sky Palace stood as motionless as statues. They were all holding their hearts in their mouths the moment Zen made it into the innermost circle. As always, Zen continued to surprise them with his excellent performance. But they never expected Zen's advance to end so abruptly. He had only just taken a few steps into the circle. It was an unacceptable fact, most especially for Pierce. He was stunned, frozen in place, picturing the significant changes Zen's death could bring to the Oneness Sky Palace. They could easily be forced to migrate from the Bloom Divine Province. Not to mention that they had to save Eastern Emperor Tai and Madame Yasmin without Zen's power. All of a sudden, the future seemed far too dangerous. Whether or not he admitted to the fact, the young man had become an indispensable existence to the Oneness Sky Palace. The other races, remarks of regret pierced their ears like needles, overwhelming them with grief and distress. For a moment, none of them dared speak a word, only staring at Zen's footprints on the painting. Wait, but his protective light hasn't dissipated. He shouldn't be dead yet, right? Suddenly, Libby chimed in. While the Oneness Sky Palace's people had never entered the painting themselves, they did have a general understanding of it. Before eroding one's body, the void sand had to first break down one's protective light completely. But Zen had disappeared so suddenly, leaving behind only his feet. Naturally, everyone assumed his body had been quickly devoured by the grains of sand. But upon further consideration, they began to realize that there was something wrong. His protective light was indeed weak, but it was still intact. Following Libby's lead, the rest of the crowd in the Grand Plain stage also noticed the inconsistency. They moved. His footprints moved on the painting. Someone suddenly shouted with utter shock. They're disappearing every now and then. This seems familiar. I see now. It's the worm taper's mysterious ability. This boy must have the means to lift himself out of the painting. The worm taper's mysterious style of movement was widely known. They were believed to have the ability to separate themselves from the painting while keeping their painting form. They would disappear and appear repeatedly as they moved across the painting. Such an ability was nothing short of incredible. It allowed the worm tapers to move in a higher space that ordinary people couldn't see with their bare eyes. No one had ever expected Zen to carry the same kind of ability. How on earth did he learn it, they thought. Many knowledgeable warriors of the eternal realm widened their eyes in astonishment as they observed Zen's footprints that appeared on the painting from time to time. Once Zen separated himself from the painting, he heaved a deep sigh of relief. The void sand had finally lost its target, turning instead to corrode Zen's feet, the soles of his feet that kept him in contact with the painting, to be exact. As Zen leapt high off the surface, his entire presence completely disappeared from it. I should have just tried this earlier. I could have saved so much effort. At this point, Zen was complacent enough to wonder such things. But the space above the painting suddenly began trembling. Much to his surprise, clouds of dark purple void sand had also left the painting to surge toward him. What? I didn't know it could also separate itself from the painting. After a moment of shock, Zen's alarm kicked in as the wave of sand was just about to swallow him whole. His body sank downward as he once again returned to the painting. A deafening cheer erupted from the Grand Plain stage the moment he returned. Pierce, Auden, and the rest could feel all their worries fade away at the sight of his arrival. Just as Libby had surmised, Zen wasn't damaged at all. The Eternal Realm Master's reaction told them that Zen had obtained an extraordinary ability to separate from the painting at will. The minute Zen returned to it, though, the void sand followed suit and continued swarming toward him. But the interval it provided when the void sand shifted between forms gave Zen a break. Without any hesitation, Zen lifted himself out of the painting once again before the void sand followed him out. And so Zen continued moving in and out of the painting continuously. The motion was somewhat like swimming. It was as though he was repeatedly diving into the water and bobbing up. The void sand was still on his tail. But with this strange means of movement, he managed to avoid getting eroded and getting his protective light broken down. Soon enough, Zen had already passed by the many hexagram arrays along the way that his predecessors had entered. Once Zen surpassed the record of the spider spirit from the star spider civilization, the element spirit race's ice spirit was the only one left who held a higher rank. For countless years, the ice spirit was in first place. He was known as one of the most powerful beings on the other shore. Chapter 3418, The Closure of the Eternal Scroll Painting. The room the ice spirit went in was a little far away from the one the spider spirit went in, as two rooms of hexagram arrays lay in between them. This meant that the ice spirit was much stronger than the spider spirit. However, such long distance of superiority was easily surpassed by Zen in less than half a minute. He really surpassed him. I've never seen anyone who reached this level. He actually surpassed the ice spirit of the element spirit race. But isn't the ice spirit already in the center of the innermost circle? If he surpassed the ice spirit, then will he have the chance to fuse with a bloodline? In everyone's mind, the ice spirit was the pinnacle of strength, the symbol of the final destination. Since ancient times, the ice spirit's position remained unshakable. Everyone thought that there might be a select few who could also reach the same destination but never surpass it. Yet now, Zen easily went past this pinnacle. That one step forward meant a lot to these other shore creatures. There's still a hexagram array ahead, but I can't see if there's also a room. It might just be covered up by darkness. Zen continued to jump in and out of the scroll painting. He did not have the luxury to observe and could only step onto the hexagram array. In the center of the huge vortex was a mass of black substance. This eldritch mass had already been repeatedly analyzed by numerous other shore creatures. Some believed it to be a form of void sand while others thought it was a passage. Nobody ever had the chance to verify these assumptions because none of them had ever been able to surpass the ice spirit. There were also a lot of arguments about the substance. Since the ice spirit stopped just before he reached it, people began to think that it was because he couldn't resist the void sand or that he did not dare approach it because he too did not know what it was. Today, they finally had a chance to figure out just what this black mass was. In a corner of the Grand Plain stage, a half-human, half-bull creature sat on the bronze ground, his big eyes transfixed on the eternal scroll painting. This creature had made a bold guess, that the position of the ice spirit was not the destination and that the center of the huge vortex was, in fact, somewhere else. Most of the other shore creatures he knew viewed his conjecture as a joke. This half-human, half-bull creature did not even have the strength to enter the vortex, so what right did he have to assume what lay within that black mass? As Zen stepped onto the hexagram array just at the edge of the black mass, his figure disappeared. A passage, the half-human, half-bull creature exclaimed. It's a passage, I was right. He could have very well jumped in joy, but, unfortunately, there was nobody he could share his discovery with since the area he was in was deserted. Did he just disappear? The other shore creatures whispered amongst themselves. Was he absorbed by the black substance? Maybe he was transmitted away. There was no blazing light on the eternal scroll painting when Zen stepped onto the hexagram array. He just simply disappeared. One moment he was there and the next he wasn't. It was quiet all throughout the Grand Plain stage as everyone tried to come up with a reason for Zen's sudden disappearance. Buzz. Somewhere in the Grand Plain stage, a ball floated somewhere. Inside this ball was none other than Claire of the element spirit race. She was not in the form of a woman, nor was there any expression on her face. Claire took a good, long look at the eternal scroll painting. I wonder what the consequences will be, she muttered under her breath. Another woman appeared in a blood-red ball in a different area of the Grand Plain stage. It was Samantha of the Nihility race. The Grand Master of Heaven had already left with the evil god and she was tasked to stay and record what Zen did. Things seem to be in accordance with the Master's guesses, she said with a cautious look on her face. There was a blood-red gem in her hand which recorded all the scenes that had taken place within the eternal scroll painting. Through this gem, the Grand Master of Heaven would be informed of all the important happenings. The souls of light from the Oneness Sky Palace once again grew nervous since they couldn't confirm Zen's condition. Go and see how Zen's corporeal body looks like, Pierce ordered Athamar. Zen's true body remained in the Oneness Sky Palace, but the one on the other shore had disappeared. Even Pierce could not understand the consequences of this event. Athamar did as he was ordered and withdrew from the other shore. 20 seconds later, he returned and breathed a sigh of relief. Zen's corporeal body is safe. Pierce nodded in understanding. I hope he can come out of the eternal scroll painting safely. Both Yasemin and Eastern Emperor Tai remained trapped on the other shore. He didn't want Zen to follow in their footsteps. The other souls of light remained silent and the atmosphere around them grew frosty. Everyone's heart was naturally filled with worry. You're worrying too much, Elder Pierce. Zen's never let us down, Athamar said. His words eased the atmosphere just a bit. Auden and the others let out a chuckle as they echoed Athamar's sentiments. That's true, he's never let us down. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, 15 minutes. Bang, a sudden ray of blazing light flashed from within the eternal scroll painting. It shot down and smashed onto a 3 purities stone on the bronze ground. Soon enough, the member of the Jade Crown race with a rather big build emerged. He was the one who entered the huge vortex after the one from the Life race. He had 7 imprints and managed to enter the 9th circle of the vortex. His other race members couldn't help but look at him in awe since the bloodline of the 9th circle was no doubt enough to make him a backbone of their race. Following his return, rays of blazing light would continue to smash down onto the bronze ground, accompanied with a cheer from the respective other shore race that received them. Bang, Kirk, Egan, and a talent of the grasshopper race were the last to arrive. The last one managed to enter an inner circle. Save for the member of the Life race who died and Zen who mysteriously disappeared, everyone managed to return safely. The souls of light from the Oneness Sky Palace craned their necks in an effort to see if Zen made it. It wasn't just them. The Three Eyes race, the Swallow Victory race, and even the other neutral races were also concerned about the situation. Since Zen supported the finale way and had shown his potential by surpassing the Eye Spirit, they all hoped he would be able to come back alive. However, there were quite a number of those who hoped for the opposite. Those affiliated with the Element Spirit race and the Nihility race, such as the Violet Cloud race, hoped for Zen's death. There was no way they could stomach the rise of another force. There's no need to wait. That guy has no doubt been eroded to dust by the void sand. It's been so long, there's no way he's coming back. Quote. The ridicule from the Violet Cloud race was truly too much. Libby wanted to refute them and say something equally scathing, but Pierce stopped her. Arguing with them was useless in this situation. They continued to wait for an hour more before the black mass within the eternal scroll painting fully dissipated. The huge vortex and the other shore creatures, pictures disappeared, which signaled the closing of the eternal scroll painting. Chapter 3419, Migration. The fox girl was on the second page of the eternal scroll painting. Her figure was still proportioned perfectly, even when outlined by the black ink. She was surrounded by black savage beasts, but they weren't hostile, they scurried around her like her pets. Swoosh! A gust of cold wind blew from afar, dissipating some of the ink on the scroll painting rather quickly. Master Brush Wielder, is he there? Asked the fox girl somewhat desperately as she looked up. From where she stood, she couldn't see Zen's exact route. The brush wielder appeared above. He was able to see everything from page 1 to 3. He's in, answered the crying face. The fox girl breathed a huge sigh of relief, but there was still a hint of worry visible on her face. I do hope he succeeds. Being so patient and waiting for this one chance was no mean feat. Zen could not fail. Fear overcame her as she waited hopefully. If he did manage to succeed, her race's curse would probably be broken. But one chance was all there was. She had no choice but to pray vehemently in silence. Somewhere in stage 33, in a huge metal mountain, a white ball slowly rose up. There was nothing in it, not even any of the 5 elements. The white ball floated above the metal and began rattling chaotically on the inside. A thin crack surfaced in the center. When it suddenly opened, a black eye appeared out of it. This was the strongest warrior of the element spirit race, Ice Spirit, who had been the #1 warrior on the eternal scroll painting for countless years. Sizzle! The big black eye opened and a red light glowed in front of it, a slender woman appearing from within it. Chief, why have you summoned me? She asked sweetly. Claire, I've told you hundreds of times not to come before me in this human figure, reprimanded the Ice Spirit sternly. She didn't seem to take it seriously and said, I feel free in this form. I like it. She didn't seem afraid of the Ice Spirit despite being a subordinate. She did, after all, hold the right to make many decisions. I have prepared a body for you as well. Would you like to try it? She pointed to the side and the flames flickering on her fingertips created a human with a well-proportioned and in-shape body. In fact, it looked very much like Zen. Don't make such horrible jokes. The eye flashed a white light which shattered the human body. Claire wasn't offended or at all bothered. She simply recreated it and put her arm around the man's neck, smiling playfully. I know what you're thinking. Zen has indeed already surpassed you in the eternal scroll painting. The Ice Spirit's annoyance was clear in the eye. I'm sure it was designed by him. Exactly right, Claire replied with disdain all over face. Chief, you are suspicious and cunning, but your character has held you back. I've known it since the beginning. Is this why you let him in? His dissatisfaction could be felt clearly. The element spirit race had faced several big and dangerous challenges on the other shore. This threat came from a mere human, but the Ice Spirit still regarded it as the greatest of them all. Claire stretched a finger out and drew circles on the look-alike Zen's face. Since we can't stop him, all we can do is make the best of the situation. We still have a great chance of winning him over. How do you plan to accomplish that? Asked the Ice Spirit. She moved her palm up from fake Zen's face and opened his eyes. Getting the origin level bloodline is not easy, it cannot be obtained quickly. If he stays in that place for a while, his physical body may not be difficult to get. If I get his body, he will submit to me, yes. Claire turned her head to look at Zen. It was her little puppet that she could make do exactly as she wanted. She made it nod stiffly and reply, yes. Her strategy satisfied the Ice Spirit. If that's the case, you have to make a move as soon as possible. Don't worry, Chief, I'm fully prepared. There will be an attack on the Oneness Sky Palace again, and this time we will kill them all, she promised with a sweet smile, while the look-alike Zen beside her grinned as well. The Ice Spirit's big eye blinked, and before he closed it he added, by the way, you should show me more respect next time. He finished speaking and completely disappeared into a white ball, slowly descending from the top of the metal mountain. I will be the one to be respected, Claire muttered menacingly. She looked at Zen, very satisfied with this body. She kissed it gently and their 2 bodies turned into flames and disappeared within the sphere. Pierce saw the eternal scroll painting close and fell into a daze for a moment. Something is wrong, he thought to himself. What's the matter, Pierce? Asked Auden. Let's get out of the other shore first. As soon as Pierce finished speaking, he left the other shore. At the same time, all the souls of light around him, including Auden, Athamar and Libby, hastily chanted the illusion-breaking rune and returned to the source world. Swish! A golden light rose from the Phoenix Palace and exploded above, forming a snow-white circle of light. This was Pierce's summoning order. The masters of the 7 mountains of the Oneness Sky Palace saw the circle of light and began whispering words of worry in their hearts. The Oneness Sky Palace had just stabilized a few days ago and now something major was already happening. The color drained from all their faces as they made their way to the Phoenix Palace. Soon all the masters were gathered in the hall, including the representatives of the Sun Crow race. All the members of the Oneness Sky Palace are expected to migrate to the Pear Hill, announced Pierce. The hall erupted into an uproar. Pierce had wanted to move the Oneness Sky Palace to the Pear Hill when they had been invaded by the Sun Crow race. In this way, they could save their lives and energy before Eastern Emperor Tai awoke. However, Zia and the real Eastern Emperor Tai had later given the Oneness Sky Palace the strength to put up a fight. Now that Zen was trapped in the Eternal Scroll painting, whether he was safe or not, he could not protect the Oneness Sky Palace. This was why Pierce had announced the migration. "You must give me reason," a master from the Bright Mountain demanded. He had been in charge of the Bright Mountain since the death of their leader. "I will not give you a reason. It's simple. If you want to die, stay. You have 1 day to mobilize your people," Pierce replied briefly. The implication was clear. The Oneness Sky Palace was about to suffer a catastrophe. If they didn't move, they would die. The masters of the mountains understood. Pierce's attitude indicated that they indeed had no choice. Chapter 3420, The Last Room. It was not easy for all of the members of the Oneness Sky Palace to relocate to another place. To do so in only 1 day was virtually impossible. Within this short period of time, only some of the core disciples and royal members could be removed. These core disciples were the hope of the Oneness Sky Palace for the future. After all, as long as they survived, hope still remained. Several huge flying ships had landed on the sword sects of the 7 mountains, and the training rooms were opened by force one by one. Those disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace who were still cultivating on the other shore were rudely awakened by force. Some disciples who were still in the temple or unable to leave the other shore were unceremoniously moved to the flying ships and stacked in rows, like goods to be transported. In front of the Phoenix Palace, a huge flying ship had docked, and the disciples of the 3 sword sects quickly marched onto it, one after another. It was not compulsory for the other shore realm disciples to join the migration, but the dire consequences of staying on in the Bloom Divine Province could be imagined. Once the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race invaded the Bloom Divine Province, the chances of anyone surviving would be very small. Some of the more stubborn disciples chose to return to the clans of the Clear Lake, and the Oneness Sky Palace did not try to stop them. "Disciples of the Land of Sword Grief, step over here," Hyam called, guiding the disciples onto the flying ship. Behind Hyam, many disciples, including Elvinia, were sitting cross-legged. Elvinia was still receiving training in the Soul City, so he couldn't force her to wake up. He had carried her onto the ship and placed her here. "I didn't expect to be forced to depart the Oneness Sky Palace so soon." A disciple of the Land of Sword Grief gazed with reluctant eyes at the river and mountains in the distance. The 7 mountains were the bedstone of the Oneness Sky Palace. The Oneness Sky Palace had stood here for countless centuries, but no one had expected they would have to leave it in such a hurried disarray. "We will return," another disciple from the Land of Sword Grief muttered. "We will return, rest assured." They were a part of the high-level reserve forces of the Oneness Sky Palace, and they had faced some real and hair-raising situations. The current situation indeed didn't bode well for the Oneness Sky Palace, but as long as they could survive this hard time, they would return sooner or later. "Excuse me," Pierce shouted from his mid-air position, carrying a huge red crystal on his shoulder. After the disciples cleared a space for him, Pierce landed on the deck of the flying ship and gently set down the red crystal. A physical body was embedded in the red crystal, seemingly asleep. It was none other than Eastern Emperor Tai. This red crystal had an extraordinary history. It had been excavated from the depths of the Central Rift Valley in the Source World. It was known to be one of the hardest materials in the Source World. The red crystal could oppose the power of over 100,000 divine megatons, which was the equivalent of an all-out attack by an Eternal Realm Master. After lowering the body of Eastern Emperor Tai on the flying ship, Pierce retreated 2 steps backward and bowed respectfully to Eastern Emperor Tai. The red crystal was absorbed into the ship's interior. Soon after, another figure appeared in the sky. This was Winchell. He also carried a red crystal, and what locked inside the red crystal was the body of Yasmin. Just like Pierce, he lowered the red crystal to the deck of the flying ship, and it sank inside the ship. Seeing the 2 strongest warriors of the Oneness Sky Palace being transported here, the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace were muttering among themselves in low voices. "Even Eastern Emperor Tai and Madame Yasmin have been brought here. But where is Zen? It is said that Zen is occupied in the Eternal Scroll painting and won't be able to return for the time being. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to leave the Bloom Divine Province. Alas, I have an ominous feeling that Zen will definitely not return." Just as these people were discussing this, a woman robed in blue stepped over. As she heard their words, her pair of neat eyebrows suddenly twisted, and a fierce light burned in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" The woman in blue was none other than Libby, who had returned from the other shore. The disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace, who were discussing this in low voices, fell silent, and they dared not say anything else. Libby had successfully completed her cultivation in the land of sword grief. Due to Eastern Emperor Tai's imprisonment on the other shore, he couldn't make her the Oneness Governor, but given her strength, she was comparable to the Oneness Sky Palace's Oneness Governors. In the blink of an eye, another figure appeared in the sky. It was Athamar, who was carrying the last red crystal on his shoulder as he arrived on the flying ship. Zen was lying inside this red crystal. As Libby stared at Zen inside the red crystal, her eyes darkened. She believed without a shadow of doubt that Zen would definitely wake up. However, could the Oneness Sky Palace survive until then? After the Oneness Sky Palace reached a decision, they quickly informed the Pear Hill through the other shore. The Pear Hill's members also rushed to the Oneness Sky Palace. However, due to the attitude of the Nihility race and the Element Spirit race towards Zen, it was impossible for the two races not to step up and take action. They were hard-pressed for time. Every second and every minute were of vital importance. After placing the 3 red crystals with their occupants into the flying ship, the 7 mountains all sped up. After most of the core members of the Oneness Sky Palace had boarded the flying ship, a white light ignited from the bottom of the ship. A long and sharp flute sound reverberated through the ship, and the giant flying ship slowly began to rise into the sky. From the other 6 mountains, other identically huge flying ships also rose ponderously. Soon after, 7 giant flying ships gathered into formation and flew towards the west at tremendous speed. Inside the Eternal Scroll painting. The moment Zen had stepped into the hexagram array, his form had returned to normal. Once he clearly saw everything in front of him, his face suddenly froze. Is this the last room? There was no room inside the black mass. The information the fox girl had provided was false. All that he could see was a huge and empty space. Zen was in a corner of this space, standing atop the stone platform of a hexagram array. Primeval Lord of Heaven, are all of the rooms in the big vortex similar to this? Zen queried. The Primeval Lord of Heaven instantly shook his head. The other rooms are much smaller, but they are similar to what you would expect. Once you enter through the hexagram array, you will find it possible to merge with the bloodline. Zen had also come in through the hexagram array, but he seemed to have entered an unusual place. After observing the room from the stone platform of the hexagram array for a while, Zen finally jumped down. The ground was a kind of soft soil, and there was a faintly putrid smell to it. Every step he took left a 1-inch deep footprint on it. After Zen had taken a dozen steps forward, a figure only half his height suddenly appeared behind him. It appeared to be a human boy with bangs and a pale face, and he was covered with rotting wounds. He looked as lifeless as a corpse. Once he appeared, he walked forward on the footprints Zen had left. His movements were mechanical and strange. He appeared clumsy when moving his hands and legs. He didn't seem to be human at all when walking and was like a kind of sarcophagus animal. When Zen took a step forward, so did he. The two of them moved almost in unison. With Zen's high cultivation base, his spiritual sense was constantly alert, but he couldn't even sense the little boy's movements. Zen walked over 1,000 steps, but the small pale-faced boy walked the same amount without showing any strain. The little boy's legs were short, but with every step he took, he would float into the air for a short distance, moving ever closer and closer to Zen.